It should be in order now. Give me 1 second. It's gonna take time because this fucking.
Okay, guys. Sorry, I just had Skype reset my speakers. I've just fixed that. Alright, I'm here now.
All right, cool. All right, we're here. The stream is operational. Give me 1 second to send you the link.
Yeah, Jan's in the stream already.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, we're seeing it. Jews in Islam featuring Lloyd De Jongh, and Jan is in the stream as well, so he'll be running back up.
Okay, that'll be interesting. So it's streaming right now. So I guess welcome to the Digital Renegade podcast. I'm your host, the Dashing Rogue. I'm with my frequent sidekick, Artistic Layman. Hey, Luke.
How you do, fellow kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing this stream a little offhand. It's a little bit ghetto rigged right now, simply because YouTube has made it so that Google Hangouts is no longer a option. So we have to do this via OBS. So it's kind of a bit ghetto rigged. But I really wanted to have our guest here, Lloyd De Jongh, on. He had a lot of things that were to say about Islam as well as Judaism. I think a lot of us can benefit from his information. He has a very vast wealth of knowledge on the subject of Islam as well as Judaism. Certain topics such as the Talmud and the Quran and what have you. So, how are you doing, Lloyd?
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
All right. So, from what I understand, and I've spoken to you prior to this, apparently a lot of the things that the alt-right, the white nationalists, and what have you have spoken about the Talmud and what have you, are wrong. Is that correct? From what you understand?
Yeah, it's based on deliberate propaganda that in previous episodes that you've watched myself and Jan do. It's based on literature written. The first book that we traced was written in 1700, and then in 1892 another book was written by a since defrocked Catholic priest, obviously, called I.B. Pramaitis, who had no knowledge of the Talmud, wrote the book smearing the Jews, smearing the Talmud, was taken to court, couldn't defend himself, and ultimately lost his reputation and was thrown out of the church. And then most recently, obviously, we have Nazi propaganda against the Jews. Then there was the Islamic propaganda, as well as a massive propaganda push from 1967 after the Arab League lost the Six-Day War. The Russians, who were backing the Arab League, were very, very embarrassed, launched a massive propaganda campaign, and that's been the genesis of the modern, shall we say, propaganda campaign to smear the Jews and to smear Judaism, as well as indirectly the Bible.
Interesting. So I guess we should start from the basics of what I guess we should start with the basic claims that have been made by a lot of these propagandists, whether they're white nationalists, Islamicists, or they're people who just don't know what they're talking about. Because to be quite honest with you, Lloyd, I didn't know much of what I was talking about. I was just regurgitating what people have said because it must be true because it's popular opinion, right?
Understood. I mean, yeah, people tend to go with the flow. People have limited time, don't have time to research everything, and just assume what they're told. But it's also very cleverly written propaganda designed to be believed.
Interesting. So, hello. Hey, Eon. Hey, Logosmedia. How you doing? So, well, where would you like to start, Lloyd?
Well, do you have any questions, anything specific you want to tackle, or?
All right. How about the book? Because we spoke about this earlier yesterday. About I think it's the book, the Jesus and the Talmud by Peter Schaefer, I believe his name is.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of the book. We haven't read it. We've looked at some of the research around. Well, we've researched around it and examined some of the claims. So this is one of the things we need to. That's on our. It's in our database, and it's one of the things that we are currently working on, and would in the future do an episode. But Peter Schaefer was quite bluntly reaching. And if you read other scholars' reviews of his book, and in fact, the simplest way is if you just go to Amazon and read the reviews, and some of them are written by fairly knowledgeable scholars and other people who know the subject, he is taken to pieces over his research. There's a lot of reaching, there's a lot of assumption. He's, I don't think this is his best work. This is very poor academic showing.
All right. Well, in that case, I guess claims. Well, do you have a link to that database, or the information about certain sources that we'll be discussing today?
Well, I've told you about my personal database that Jan and I use, as well as Todd. We have a shared resource database with these things, but that I can share with you. I can drop a link after the show. But the thing is, at this point we want to keep it within we haven't opened it to the public. It's a research database that is shared with various people and various groups, but it's not a public database as yet.
So this information is not public, so I wouldn't be able to link it in the description below. Then
the thing is that what we're trying to do is we're bringing together a lot of disparate information into one single resource, so it's easy to find, it's searchable, it's indexed, it's categorized, so it makes information easy to find. Give you an example. Since you mentioned Schaefer, let me tackle that for a moment.
Okay.
Now, various aspects of our research are in different stages of readiness and completeness, of course. Now, some things more so than others. But let me give you an example. Jesus was a very common name back during that period. So there are multiple different Jesus characters, Jesus figures, and historically.
Named Jesus, Christ. Named Jesus, not Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so
Jesus.
like, how would it be pronounced, may I ask, according to the tongue of, I guess, the Jews at the time?
Different. So there's some degree of ambiguity. There's Yeshua. There's some degree of ambiguity there as well, because a Yeshu may be Jesus, and a Yeshua may be Jesus, but depending on the particular historical narrative you're looking at, but when you start looking at the chronological accuracy of the character in terms of his relation to Jesus, some of these characters fall well prior to Jesus. Some of them fall well after.
Okay.
So they can't. So I'll give you one example. There is the character of Jesus that is studying with the rabbi, and he's not a good student, and he wants favor from the rabbi, but there's some sort of falling out, and he gets thrown out of the yeshiva. He gets thrown out of the school. He then goes to Egypt, and he comes back as trained in black magic, which he'd learned in Egypt. Right. So this is a common narrative. This particular story is a common one used to say, well, the Jews blasphemed Jesus and so on. However, that particular story dates to more than a century before Jesus of Nazareth was born. And it's a story that has history from prior to the birth of Jesus. So obviously it's an old story relating to a completely different historical character. Now, Schaefer assumes or implies or subtly hints or asserts that this is Jesus. So he takes numerous characters, including he takes a character called Pantera, and he insists that this supposed Roman soldier is also Jesus. Now, also,
I question real quick. I thought that Pantera was the father of Jesus, like one of the claims in the Talmud, from what I understand, at least, of how I've always believed it was that Jesus was the son of Pantera, which he was a Roman soldier, and his wife, Mary, Mother Mary, would have been seen as a whore. That's what I was.
Correct. Now Schaefer makes a lot of assumptions and implies lots of things. This is not one of the subjects that we are currently researching, but I have some notes on that. Actually, let me look up. Am I able to share screens at any point?
I don't know if we have that ability. Again, this is off on the fly. Again, I oftentimes use Google Hangouts as opposed to just Skype. So I think you could try. You could try if you'd like.
Skype is capable of doing that. I wasn't expecting this particular question. It wasn't one we went into depth yesterday.
Let's see.
But there are multiple. See, there are multiple versions. I need to find a specific narrative comparing Jesus. Let's see.
You may try it.
So find that particular reference because I actually have a table that lists all of this. Here we go. I'm going to find that specific reference. So there are multiple different versions of the Talmud, different translations, shall we say. Here we go. Let me share my screen. Hopefully that'll help to clarify, because it's easier to work with actual information that I can. Here's where we are. I'm going to share my secondary screen. Okay, let me know if this comes up.
I see black right now.
Okay, give it a second.
There it is.
Okay. So what happens is there are multiple different variations of the Talmud translations, and many of them in various aspects conflict. So in a couple of them, they have been rewritten to reflect Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth. In others, it's not. It's a different Jesus, a different historical character, and who's also chronologically out of sequence.
Okay.
So you've got, for instance, they speak of Jesus had 5 disciples, right? Jesus had 5 disciples. We know that Jesus did not have 5 disciples. But also the character that they reference in some of the different translations is an earlier character.
Right.
So there's a bunch of different conflicts, and from what I know, again, this is something that we need to spend more time on, that we will be spending more time on to clarify and do an episode in the future. But there's a lot of there was some editing, there was some censorship forced upon the Jews by the church. There's some rewriting, so there's some conflict, and so there's a lot of assumptions and sort of glossing over detail that was done by Schaeffer. And as I said, he was taken apart for his supposed scholarship on this particular issue, on this particular.
Okay.
And also they mention here, for instance, they speak of they hung Jesus. We know he wasn't. Yeah. See,
he
when it says
was crucified. Yeah.
See, so there's a lot of conflict. So this has to be investigated. So it's not as cut and dried as people make out.
Right. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, honestly, a lot of the claims I've heard from you guys, I'll just be honest with you. I'm a little bit speechless, to be quite honest with you. A lot of this stuff has just blew my whole world, and I never would have thought of it, and I never would have looked at it. Now I'm seeing it right in my face, and it's hard to process it all. But, I guess other claims about the Talmud before we get into Islam, because I think you want to talk a lot about Islam, because a lot of what has been said about Islam, or
Yeah, so
Judaism. Go ahead.
So we discussed yesterday, remember, that if you look at Islam, people meant now the Talmud is not always authoritative. The Talmud is a book of, it's case law. It's also oral traditions, stories, folklore, and so on. And it is not always authoritative, or in fact, the passages that people quote are not authoritative. Sometimes, for instance, a chapter in the Talmud is typically 20 to 50 paragraphs long. Each paragraph is, let's say, 10 or 12 sentences. Now, someone will literally take 5 words and claim that this is the definitive statement from the Talmud, when this may be a question that is asked by a rabbi to students to get them to discuss a topic and to apply the law to the topic, or it might be a debate between rabbis where one is playing devil's advocate. This is pretty common. So they'll take one sentence or less than one sentence, paraphrase it, edit it, and then claim this is authoritative. We went yesterday through a variety of these quotes where this was where I explained that many of these quotes are contradicted, and the ultimate authoritative comment is completely opposite to what is implied. Do you want to discuss a little bit about that, as well as some of the ways that Islam views Christianity as blasphemous and the way it views Jesus?
Sure, we could do that. Are you experiencing any mic echo? Apparently, Jan's saying I'm having some mic echo. Is
No,
it
it's good
Jan?
enough.
I'm hearing something of an echo.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. No echo.
It's a faint one.
Yeah. Perfect audio on my side.
Yeah. Can you mute yourself, Luke, for a second? Boom, boom, boom. Okay, I think we're good. If it happens again, let us know, Jan. This is my first rodeo doing OBS on as a streaming service. Go on, continue with what you were going to do.
So, the references to Jesus now, you also have to realize the Talmud is also to some degree a diary of the dialogues between the rabbis, and it indicates their thinking at a given time in history. Now, they suffered huge amounts of persecution. There was torture, there was theft, there was expulsion by Christians all across Europe. They suffered quite tremendously under the church, be it Catholic or be it Protestant. And there was a huge amount of suffering. And they were angry, right? They were very angry, and some of the anger makes its way into the Talmud in some of those discussions. And this is something that is never spoken about by these people who quite bluntly hate the Jews and are just spreading literally Nazi, Islamic, and communist propaganda about them. But they mention, so these stories about Jesus are not authoritative because the Talmud is a commentary on the Bible, specifically the Torah, the Old Testament, let's say, as we would call it. So the Torah cannot conflict with the Old Testament. It's an exegesis of, it's a commentary upon the Old Testament. It has to be in accordance with the Old Testament. Now, if you look at Islam by comparison, Islam does not believe that Jesus was a prophet. Sorry, it believes Jesus was a prophet, but just a man, because Muhammad was married to his first wife Khadija by an Ebionite priest, which was a heretical sect that believed that Jesus was just a man, had nothing divine about him. So this is where he gathered. If you read through the Quran, you'll find that there are numerous heretical tales about Jesus, what they call Isa, actually, a different character called Isa in the Quran. Now, they believe that Jesus went to the second heaven, Muhammad goes to the seventh, Moses goes to the fifth heaven. At the end times, Jesus will come back at the right hand of Muhammad. He will destroy the cross, he will destroy the church, he will destroy the pigs, and of course they will fight the Jews and they will kill all the Jews. And then Jesus will marry a woman, he'll have children, and he will die. He will live in Muhammad's lands. And of course Muhammad will marry Mother Mary, and he will shag her that night because she's now his wife.
Oh, that's
Yeah, when you first told me that, I thought, how come no one's ever mentioned this? Because I've watched a lot of material on it by Robert Spencer and other critiques on Islam, and I'm surprised no one mentions this.
Yeah, I know. Well, so think, if the Jews are being blasphemous, and it was a political reaction to the way that they were being treated by Christians, right? But it's not necessarily authoritative because it's not the Bible, right? How come, if Islam is blatantly blasphemous against Christianity, and in fact I gave you a passage earlier, as you recall, where I mentioned that Muslims have to fight the Jews and Christians. Why is this okay within Islam? Why is this not discussed? Let me actually read that passage. Let me actually find that. Here we are above. And I need to find our chat.
right.
Yeah, so listen to this. Fighting the Jews and Christians is legislated. In other words, it's legally legislated, commanded, because they are idolaters and disbelievers. Allah the Exalted encourages the believers, that is the Muslims, to fight the Jews and the Christians who uttered this terrible statement and utter lies against Allah the Exalted. Because the Jews claim that Uzair was the son of God, which they do not. There is no such reference within Judaism, and Allah is free of what they attribute to him. As for the misguidance of Christians over Isa, the Islamic Jesus, it is obvious. That is why Allah declared both groups to be liars. So we are to be fought and subjugated because we lie about Jesus.
And
So,
when you say we, we're talking Christians and Jews, right?
yes, we are the people. Well, we're the people of the book. Now, to add to that, so they don't believe. They say in Islam, they say that, and this is in contravention of Roman historians, Greek historians, and all the records of the day, that there was Jesus never died, that someone else was put in his place, given his face, and this person died. Jesus was thus never resurrected, never went to heaven, is not the Son of God, is not divine, and is not greater than Muhammad. All of this is in direct contravention of Christian faith, and in fact invalidates Christianity, because if there was no death and resurrection, there is no Christian faith, and Islam bluntly says this, including the whole thing about Mother Mary I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Why is this? Well, why does no one speak out against that?
Well, I mean, I just heard about it yesterday, and it kind of scared the fuck out of me. To be quite honest with you, a lot of this stuff is scary. Like, it legitimately terrified me. Like, it's not enough that my whole worldview was shattered when it comes to how, what my assumptions about Islam, not Islam, but my assumptions about the Talmud and Judaism, but also how blatantly, like, evil, like, keyword is evil here, when it comes to Islam. It's evil. I mean, you could say that there's animosity and hatred between Jews and Gentiles and Christians and followers of Judaism, but Muslims go all the next way. They say they're gonna cuck God's woman. It's disgusting.
Well,
it's evil.
true. Let me actually bring up. Let me talk about that just briefly in terms of what is your. My screen is still being shown, right?
Yes, it's still being shown.
Okay, so let me just find this. Let me make it clear what the. Okay, so this is called Fighting for the Cause of Allah. This is from the Islamic Sharia, right? Sharia is Islamic law, right? So it is the eternal law of Allah, can never be changed, never be questioned.
May I
Jihad.
ask a question real quick about the Sharia?
Sure.
Where do they get the note? Where are they getting the information that would comprise the Sharia? Like, how would you get the information that would?
The Sharia is derived from the Quran and from the Hadith, which are the reports about the life of Muhammad, the things he did, the things he didn't do, and the things that he did not allow.
Okay, and the Hadith is the life of Muhammad, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The Hadith are reports from others about Muhammad, about the things he commanded, things he did not allow, things he did allow, things he said, things he didn't say.
So it's like the Gospels, then, we could argue, then, of similar to the Gospel of Luke.
Well, in a sense, it's more like a commentary on Muhammad as a form of the Book of Leviticus, except expanded by several chapters.
Yeah, it's from hundreds of different people telling their experiences of their meetings with Muhammad. So tend to be reports of the traditions, simply called the traditions. There is the Sirah, which is effectively the political and military campaigns of Muhammad. That is less of a factor in the Sharia. But the Sharia is effectively wanting to be like Muhammad. Right, just so you know, and Jan, thank you for this, much appreciated. So in Al-Mujam al-Kabir, which are hadith compiled by Imam Tabarani, this is where Muhammad declares that Allah will wed me in paradise to Mary, daughter of Imran. Now, which is also interesting, because daughter of Imran, if you look at that, if you work out the chronology of that, it's completely wrong. They have her completely in the wrong era. I think they place her 900 years before she was born. Right? So in Arabic, the word for marriage denotes legal sexual relations and doesn't have romantic or platonic connotations.
Okay.
So now, notice this. In the Sharia, now, people talk about jihad. Just to quickly get this out the way. In the dictionary, it says, yes, jihad is struggle. But there's also the Shari definition, the legal definition of jihad. And this is, jihad means to war against non-Muslims and is etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion. Right? Jihad is obligatory. It's communal obligation. Enough people must perform it. And when enough people perform it, right, and this is he who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. So someone who assists a jihadi is also granted the paradise that a jihadi would have, right? And when enough people perform it, they are absolved of the sin of non-performance of jihad. And in this case, jihad is fighting against the unbeliever. Fighting is prescribed for you. Quran 2, 216. Slay them wherever you find them. Quran 4, 49. And fight the idolaters utterly. Now here, the Sharia references these quotes just and takes them at face value.
Right.
So this is how they have to fight against non-Muslims to establish Islam.
Right.
And so that is, so because we are idolaters, we have fought against Allah by not accepting. So yeah, so we were talking about. So yeah, any further questions?
Well, I suppose to clarify, we as Christians would be seen as idolaters in the Muslims' eyes, and I guess to put things in perspective, somebody who creates ammunition for a jihadi, or somebody who aids a jihadi in obfuscation of the truth, would they be considered a fighter in the jihad?
Yes, there's multiple different kinds of jihad.
Oh, okay. Could you go into that for a second?
Well, the year zero in the Islamic calendar is when Muhammad fled as a refugee from Mecca to Medina. And there, so Islam is revealed in stages. First, Islam is peaceful, then it is political, and then it is military, because Muhammad's life was as a religious personality, a failed religious personality, who in 13 years only gained 150 followers in Mecca. He was then expelled from Mecca for being an agitator. He then went to Medina. There he gained a political following, gained wealth and influence, and raised an army, and then fought his enemies. And he only had religious success when he had an army. And Muhammad is the perfect example of a Muslim. He's the example for all Muslims to follow, to emulate.
So he's the ideal, then. He's the ideal Muslim. He's the ideal. He is the man with the plan. He's the guy everyone should every Muslim should try to
Correct.
emulate. Okay.
Correct. And he does he says that, as we saw within the Sharia, that those who assist the jihadis are like the jihadis. So, and also not everyone is required to fight. A small minority is required. It is compulsory. However, not everyone is required to fight. Although that can change. If what is considered Islamic land or waqf is invaded, then all Muslim males at minimum are required to get involved in the fight and push out the invaders.
At minimum. So what? Let's suppose, for instance, let's say in Sweden, for instance, that they decide to kick out all the Muslims and the immigrant or the Muslim migrants and what have you. Let's say something like that were to happen. All the men would fight back, but let's say if it gets really bad, all the women would fight back as well. Is that
correct? Another, they would run messages, they would load weapons, they would provide funding, they would provide help, assistance of some type. So sorry, So when I mentioned that Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina, that is called the Hijrah. So Hijrah it's a form of jihad. It is simply immigration. And when you immigrate in the way of Allah, you also earn the highest realm of paradise as a jihadi would. So immigrating to spread Islam is a form of jihad.
So
and
would this be considered? Would this be considered similar to a missionary work instead of going and just going through a country and say preaching the word of God through the gospel? Would this be considered?
That would be dawah. That would be considered dawah.
Dawah.
Yeah, dawah, which is evangelization essentially. A bit more than that within Islam, but you're looking at a matter of this is actually immigrating. Every time you put down a mosque, that's colonization. That land is not owned. It's now consecrated to Allah, and it is granted by the Muslims to the Muslims by Allah.
Okay,
it's in perpetuity.
So it's a manifest. It's more of a manifest destiny sort of spiel that they have going. Would that be correct?
They are required because Allah's religion must be made must be made supreme above all other religions. Islam has to conquer the entire world.
All right. That makes sense. Okay, so I guess continue with the life of Muhammad, or what else would you like to discuss? I guess.
You can draw from what we discussed yesterday briefly. So let me talk about. You spoke about goy, the idea of goy. So let's maybe tackle a few myths, a few common myths, and shatter some of those.
Okay.
There's the idea that the word goy is a bad word. It's a biblical word, right? And it refers to both Israelites and non-Israelites. The word goy simply means nation or nations, right? And for instance, goy in Hebrew means nations. Jews are also called goy in the Bible. In fact, there's legoy gadol in Genesis 12:2, which means I will make you into a great nation, right? So calling non-Jews goyim is simply translates to nations, and meaning the other nations of the world. The Latin translation gentilis became Gentile.
Okay.
Right. So what we have here is, if you look, nation or people, and if people can follow my cursor, usually of non-Hebrew people. Okay. Now, in contrast to that, so actually let's look at this. The Gentile stranger enjoyed the hospitality of the Israelites, who was commanded to love him. That's Deuteronomy 10:19. Right? And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. You are to sympathize with him, for ye know the heart of the stranger, seeing you as strangers in the land of Egypt. That's Exodus 23:9. Right? So God commands the Jews in the Old Testament, and again, the Talmud is simply an exegesis of this, to treat the stranger with respect, to treat him lawfully, and to treat him with love. Now, the contrasting word in Islam is kafir. We are kafir, which means the blamed, the guilty. And 67% of the Islamic texts deal with, ultimately 51% of the Quran and 67% of the major Islamic texts deal with how politically Islam has to deal with the kafir, which is not a religious issue. This is a legal and political issue. They have to seek subjugation, dominance, and control over the kafir. And we are guilty for not following Allah, so therefore we must be punished.
Well, what would you say to somebody who says, well, that's not my interpretation of Islam. That's not my interpretation of jihad. What would you say to someone such as that?
I would check if his name is Muhammad, and if his name isn't Muhammad, then I would check if his name is Allah, and if his name isn't Allah, then maybe he should start reading what they have to say. So Islam defines Muslims. Muslims do not define Islam. Those are common apologetics tactics. The Sharia is definitive.
Okay.
So whereas the Quran lacks context, you have 5 books that essentially make up Islamic scripture. You have the Quran, which is a very tiny book. It's about roughly the length of the New Testament. It's very small. Then to go with that, you have the Hadith, which is thousands and thousands of words, right? Dozens of volumes by different authors. Then you have the Sirah, which is the biography of Muhammad. Then you have the Tafsir, which is the exegesis or commentaries. And then you have the Sharia. So if across all 5 of those, the commentaries and the writing, the scripture on that particular subject all agree, then that is the Islamic consensus, the ijma. So Islam is not what your neighbor says it is. Islam is what Muhammad says it is. And if it's in the Sharia, then he's either mistaken or lying. So take your pick.
All right. So would you say he's either lying or he's mistaken? That's interesting. All right.
And speaking of lying, is there like a particular? Well, just to go on, this might be a tangent, but is there actually some sort of some interesting topic in results to lying for Islam called taqiyya, or is that something different?
Okay, so yeah, let me do that. Okay, so I'm going to go to a chapter here. So taqiyya is essentially tactical deceit for the purposes of spreading Islam. It is, now you know that what you have in Christianity, even in Judaism, these are the ethics are the same. We respect truth. God is Logos. God is truth. We want to know what the facts are. We want to know the truth. In other words, we want to be open to the reality of a situation as close as we can be. It is about will, the will of Allah. It's not about truth, it's about will. So that would align it very much with sort of the Crowley concept of that do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Right? So it is about, so for instance, Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl, which means that he can never be criticized for that. It has thus become legal and moral in Islam to do so. Right? So that now establishes the rule, not whether it's right or not whether it's truthful or not, and so on. So people talk about taqiyya. There are 6 forms of deception within Islam. Right? So what is called the Islamic doctrine of deceit. Now, taqiyya, they will tell you, for instance, your neighbor will tell you, or the nice Muslim guy will tell you, well, that's Shia. And the Shia were doing it because they were being killed by the Sunni. Shia make up 10-15% of Islamic adherents. And, well, the Sunni version is called Muddarat. Right? But it's named, if you read through the tafsir, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see it called taqiyya there too. Right? And it is tactical deceit for the purposes of spreading Islam. Then you have 5 other forms of Islamic deceit. So you have kitman, which is deceit by silence or omission, or lying by omission. For instance, you will often see the quote, that Islam says you shouldn't kill anyone because it's as if you have killed all of mankind. Right? That's a very common statement. So let me actually... So that is 532. So let me I'm just going to add a new window here.
Okay.
Has this thing popped up? So they'll say, Islam says that you shouldn't kill anyone because it's as if you killed all of mankind. Well, that is a lie. It's a lie by omission. Right? Because it says, we ordained for the children of Israel. This is a statement taken straight out of Sanhedrin 37b, if I recall, of the Talmud. Right, it's a corruption of a quote in the Talmud, which says, now it says here in the Quran, because we ordained, this is an instruction for the Jews, specifically for the Jews. If anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder, okay, or to spread very ill-defined mischief in the land, it would be as if he had killed all mankind. So they give here rules for when it's okay to kill, right, and when it's not okay to kill. However, if you go on, right, and so it would be as if he saved all of mankind, okay? But it goes on in 533, right? It says, the recompense of those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and do mischief in the land. This could simply mean that you refuse to convert, is that they shall be killed, and this is a message to the Muslims, that they shall be killed or crucified, or their hands and feet cut off on the opposite sides, or they are exiled. This 533 is the basis for the hudad punishments in Islam, where they will chop off your hand, chop off your feet, crucify you, chop off hands and feet from opposite sides, or burn you to death, and so on, which is the barbaric Islamic hudad punishments. So yeah.
So this would be like the Charlie Hebdo people who would, draw a picture of Muhammad or mouth off about Muhammad being, let's say, a pedophile, or even telling the truth, for that matter.
Yes. Well, that falls under what's called ghibba, okay? Ghiba. So this is mentioned as well, actually. So I'll skip to that and I'll come back to the taqiyya. So let me find that section because this might be very useful to you. So that falls under slander and tale-bearing. For instance, under Judeo-Christian law, right, under Western law,
right,
Western norms, to lie about someone is slander, right? And this can be a crime. Whereas in Islam, right, if you notice something about someone that they would not want known because it is embarrassing to them, even if that thing is true, that is slander.
So if I were to say the inconvenient truth that Harvey Weinstein, for instance, beat it off into a potted plant, if he was a Muslim, or if people were protecting him,
yes,
it would be considered slander, even if it's factually true.
Correct. Okay. So slander means to mention anything concerning a person that you would dislike whether about his body, religion, everyday life, self, disposition, property, son, wife, here it goes on, right? Or anything connected with him. Okay? So anything that it is unlawful, slander and talebearing are unlawful. Okay? So even if that statement is true, so the determining factor is mentioning about a person what he would not like. Not whether it's true or not, just that he wouldn't like it.
So this literally, and again, Jan, I turned up my mic a bit. Sorry about that. If you can hear me, hopefully this works. So what you're telling me, based on what I could see, is that this literally is feels versus reals. So if I feel offended and if I don't like it, then it's okay. It's considered slander.
Yeah, correct.
Well, no wonder the leftists like Islam so much, because it literally protects them.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, today's obviously going to be a bit of a broad conversation. I haven't prepared any one specific subject. Right? We were going to just have an open conversation today. So let's cover this. So kitman, that was deceit. So they try to take something that involves killing people and torturing people to death and try to make as if that shows how Islam is peaceful when it's actually not the case. So that is kitman. Then we have tawriya, deceit by ambiguity. So tawriya, well, you can see this here. I have this highlighted here. Yeah. Tawriya. So, for instance, I knock on your door and I say, "Is your mom here?" And you tell me, "No, she's not here." Yes, she's at home. She's in her bedroom. She's in the back garden, but she's not standing there right next to you with you. Understand?
So it's like a monkey's paw, kind of.
I'm not sure how that works, but basically she's not here. You know. So you to say no, she's not here. So you're saying what you're implying is she's not here, literally here with us. She's not literally standing in front of me.
That's interesting.
Right? So you're lying, but you're not lying.
So you'd have to be very careful with your hubris of what you're saying in that regard. So if I said you're not here with me, not here physically in where I'm in the world, but you are here with me in spirit.
2 meters away, hiding behind. You could be 2 meters away, hiding behind the cupboard, right? And I could tell someone, "No, he's not here." Meaning he's not here at the door with me, but he's 2 meters to my left, hiding behind the cupboard because he doesn't want you to see him. You know, that's how that could be. So these are different forms of deceit. So the two most common, besides taqiyya, which is very commonly known and mentioned, are taysir and darura that work together, right? Taysir is deceit through facilitation, commonly known as ease and necessity. So taysir is ease and darura is necessity, right? So basically, with darura, you can engage in something that is forbidden, something haram. And ease is where they remove some of the strictures of the Sharia so that you can have pork, go to nightclubs, do things basically that allow you to go along to get along.
So they allow you to dress up and claim to be a polydemisexual or something like that, like the leftists and SJWs would say, but then they're still sleeper agents, essentially. This is how they can have sleeper agents.
Correct, because it says that as long as in your heart you remain faithful, you can lie. You can deny Muhammad, you can deny Islam on your tongue, but as long as in your heart you are faithful.
Which that in itself is creepy as hell, because apparently, I mean, I can't read your mind, you can't read my mind. We have to assume that what we do and what we say align with what we're doing, what is truthful, and factual, for that matter.
Correct. So you understand the difference. You understand the difficulty here in dealing with this, because it is a conquest ideology. It is a once it's established, it then has to move towards control, even if that takes a great deal of time. So you're looking at essentially a military doctrine. So only a small portion of Islam is actually religious, what we would recognize as how to get to heaven, right? Comparative to Buddhism. Because think, Christianity is how to be a Christian. Buddhism is how to be a Buddhist. 51% of Islam is how to subjugate everyone else.
Oh, damn.
Yes.
What's in that 50%, 51% of Islam? So that would be like the Sharia. That would be like these doctrines of deceit.
Politics and warfare. How to gain political and military control.
I just found this awesome quote by Robert Spencer talking about what you can do to lose your protected dhimmi status in a Muslim society.
Right. What is
see
that?
Let me see if I can get my microphone working.
It's sort of breaking up a bit on your end, also, Lloyd. The screen share is kind of a little bit gargled, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense, at least from my perspective.
Let me kill it for the time being.
Okay.
And just back if I need it.
If you are a dhimmi subjugated under the rule of the Islamic State, and then you get out of line, then you're dead. Your contract of protection is forfeit. Now, how do you do that? How do you get out of line? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. According to Islamic law, if you say something impermissible, notice I didn't say untrue. If you say something impermissible about Allah, Muhammad, Quran, Islam, then no more protection. Now, what is impermissible about Allah, Muhammad, Quran, or Islam? What is impermissible? Well, let's here again. Don't listen to me. I'm just a racist Islamophobic anti-Muslim bigot. Let's go to the Islamic sources. And so, in Islamic law, you can look it up. Slander. What is slander? Is slander telling lies about someone? Not according to Islamic law. According to Islamic law, you commit slander when you say something about someone that he does not wish to be known.
So, slander, like if I say, let's say a Muslim's social security number, that could be considered slander even if it is factual.
Yeah. Those things are very different concept, and people refuse to understand the differences in ideology, philosophy between Islam and Christianity and other religions.
Wow, that is a lot of this stuff is just heavy. I mean, talk about the end of the world. My worldview just died. A couple days ago, and now wow.
Well, it also makes a lot of sense why Islam and the political left in America have so much in common with each other.
I was speaking with a friend of mine, Lloyd, who was saying that, don't worry about Islam. It's being integrated and consumed by the left. But if what you're saying is true, that they can, act all, I guess, SJW-like and lefty-like and conservative-like and what have you, they very well could just be acting as sleeper agents, just going to sleep until needed to be activated. So
correct. Now, this is not an indictment of every single Muslim. However, unfortunately, according to the doctrine, it is very realistically something that could be said about some Muslims, enough Muslims. So this is something that might be. Let me share my screen again. Let's try that again, and let me bring up some of the history that isn't commonly known that might well be worth detailing. Unless you have a question, then I can tackle that.
Continue. We will get into the whole Nazi thing because I did share a few links with you of connecting the Nazis and Satanism. We'll talk about that hopefully later on if we have time. But this is all on. We're here for you right now. So go ahead.
Well, so this is introducing you to some of the research that we're busy with. We have not completed everything. We're still busy fleshing it out. We've identified the areas that we want to research. And if people like yourself want to get involved, I'm sure we can parcel off a particular subject. We want to keep it narrow so that we focus on an area and just basically gather the information. Or we have the information already. We just need to collate it neatly, right? So these are areas that we're introducing. We're familiar with these areas. We have the data. We simply just it's only a handful of us working on it. But we want to definitively defeat these particular pieces of propaganda or lies, right? I'm going to touch on Hitler and Islam, and the Nazis and Islam, if I can, just to talk about some of the propaganda, the origins of the current propaganda that is being spewed by what they call the white nationalists and so on.
Yeah.
Right, especially the origins of the anti-Jewish propaganda, which ultimately is also anti-Christian because it's anti-biblical, and it's anti-Western values.
Yeah.
Right, ultimate attack on Western values. So let me go back in history, back to the 1930s. So here we have a picture of Huma Abedin's also a very interesting character. I'll be discussing her on Tuesday on Jan's show. We're going to be taking her apart because there's a lot of questions there. So this is the Grand Mufti of Islam, Hajj Amin al-Husseini. He was the uncle of Yasser Arafat. Okay, so Haj Amin al-Husseini was a VIP guest of Hitler's. Okay, from 1941 to 1945, and he was a good friend of Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, the episode I did 2 weeks ago, which discusses the Muslim Brotherhood is the world's largest secret society. Right. And it has, as we said, the Muslim Brotherhood has about 100 million adherents, right, and massive funding. Now, this is him with Hitler, and in 1935, with al-Banna, he created the special apparatus of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was their armed wing, their violent wing, which has become the template for all modern, or most modern, Islamic jihadi terror groups. He created the structure for how this works, and the training and all that, and the ideological training, etc. And these groups. So ISIS is an outshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Baghdadi is a Muslim brother. Al-Qaeda is related to the Muslim Brotherhood. Their leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is a Muslim brother, and so on. All of these, what's his name? Osama bin Laden, Muslim brother. So when Hitler came to power, right, he obviously had a policy. He hated the Jews, and of course it is and I can go through some of the references I will about the Jews in Islam, but it is required in Islam that Jews must be wiped out. Right? They have to kill all the Jews, and I'll get to that at the end of this. I'll mention that. Himmler then, under Himmler and under Hitler, he became a Nazi SS general, and he formed the largest Nazi SS division, which had almost 30,000 members. Right, so the largest Nazi SS division was the Islamic division, made up of Muslims. Right, and their job, what he said they wanted to do, was to fight the British, fight the Americans, and kill the Jews. Now, notice here, okay, they spied for Hitler's Nazis in the Middle East. They fought for him as troops. There were 600,000 Muslims in the Nazi army, okay, that joined and fought for them. And notice here the Hanshar, which is the group that they formed. Right, that is the German for scimitar, the curved saber used by Islamic troops of the Ottoman Empire. This was their symbol.
I have a question, real quick.
Yes.
If they had 600,000 of these people, why haven't how come I haven't seen any of them in combat, or any of these like Saving Private Ryan, or
so fights in North Africa? But why don't we know that the Islamic slave trade was 200 times larger than the Atlantic slave trade and lasted for 1,400 years? Why is that not discussed in history? Why don't we discuss that there were 5 times more Europeans that were taken to North Africa by Islamic slavers than there were slaves taken from Africa to North America?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get across here is that that's not very well known, but a world war is hard to ignore. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get across here is that you'd think that 200 or 600,000 Nazi SS troops that were, part of Islam.
Troops. There was 30,000. The division had about 28,800 troops and 29,000 something, but altogether 600,000 Muslims fought on the side of the Nazis in North Africa.
Yeah, you'd think we hear more about them, but we're not hearing about them. And to me,
right.
it is just downright spooky that we don't hear about them. They're like a division that just got lost. It's very creepy.
Hours are written out of history. A couple of things that I should mention, and again, thank you to my benefactor here. The Bosnian Hanjar, they massacred Christian Serbs as well. Okay, and just a point of interest, since I'm touching on a variety of things, since we're flowing with the conversation, don't forget that if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, if you look in Wikipedia, and you look up Baphomet, Baphomet is the goat. The
goat.
The goat.
Yeah, I've spoken about that prior. I've seen it on your show and Jan's show before. Apparently, Baphomet is a perverted version of the word Muhammad.
Yes, Baphomet is Muhammad, and in fact, during the Middle Ages, mosques were known as Bafumarias.
Interesting.
So, and Baphomet was the creature that the Templars worshipped, and that's why they were excommunicated and killed.
Well, I'll push back against that for a second. I always thought that the reason the Templars were kicked out was because they owed
there were multiple reasons. Okay. No, look, there were secular reasons, there were religious reasons, but from a religious point of view, so it's a form. So Baphomet is a form of the name Mohammed, right? It was used by medieval writers, and it's alleged to be the name of the idol that the Templars were accused of worshipping, right? And the reference is here to Abbé Constant, right? And the word was Kabbalistically formed by writing backwards, right? And it's an abbreviation of Templi Omnium Hominum Pacis Abbas, or abbot or father of the temple of peace of all men, right? Now notice, Islam is the religion of peace. Now, Islam divides the world into the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, and the house of submission to Allah, and the Dar al-Harb, which is the house of war. We are warring against Allah, that's why they fight us. And so they worshipped the father of the temple of peace of all men. And the house of peace, the Dar al-Salam, will happen when all the world is subjugated under Islam.
So in other words, there'll only be peace when there's only Islam in the world. Correct.
So just back to this. So what you have is the Grand Mufti here is doing the Nazi salute in front of his troops, and here he is with Himmler, the head of the SS. Yes. Okay, and here's Himmler So this is Himmler inspecting the Islamic troops. Notice this is a very common thing. You might know also there was the Muslim Brotherhood had a newspaper where they often wrote that Hitler had converted to Islam, right? And they called him Haji Muhammad Hitler.
Haji Muhammad Hitler.
Yes, right. And here it is. This is the little cap, the little fez. But notice it's exactly like the Shriner fez, right? And notice it's got the death's head and the Nazi symbol. It's got the death's head here with the Nazi symbol.
Are you drinking anything?
Yeah, Luke.
Sorry.
Luke, can you mute your mic for a second?
Drinking cacao. Drinking cacao. No.
Can you? I don't.
Yeah. Sorry.
We're having a little bit of intermission here, folks.
Sorry. No, I'm here. What's up?
I heard a lot of background noise.
Sorry, no, I don't think she realized I wasn't on call. So this is an SS officer with exactly the same symbolism, right? So, and this is him having his wonderful lunch. So this man is Yasser Arafat's uncle. Now, I want to highlight a couple of other interesting points that may be relevant. So do you have any questions so far about the connection with Islam and Muhammad? Islam and Nazism.
Well, could you go a little bit over the Zabatendorf connection, just a bit? I mean, I don't.
That is something I have to leave to Todd. I cannot discuss that. That's outside of my range of knowledge. That's definitely Todd's subject.
Okay, so Okay. So
you notice that Hitler had a great hatred for Jews, and he spread a lot of propaganda against the Jews, right? And this is repeated today, right? The KKK said the very same things that the Nazis said about the Jews, and the Russians and Islamic propagandists say exactly the same things. Let's go back here, okay? Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was a KGB agent, okay? This was in the BBC News, and this is something people can look at. They can read through the references here, and they can see that Mahmoud Abbas is referenced in old KGB documents, right, that he was an agent of the KGB. And we also have this, the Soviet-Palestinian lie. The PLO was dreamed up by the KGB, which had a penchant for liberation organizations. This is according to the former chief of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Romania. So the KGB destroyed the official records of Arafat's birth. Now, short version, 1967 war. The Arab League was destroyed by the Israelis. They'd been trained and funded and armed by the Russians, and the Russians were humiliated. Shortly, as this article discusses, the Soviet-Palestinian lie by Judith Bergman, this is in the Gatestone Institute, if someone wants to look that up, they launched a massive propaganda campaign against the Jews, right? And so
This is the Jews, not just the Palestinians, but Jews in general, right? So
against Israel, against the Israelis. So in 1965, the USSR had formally proposed in the UN a resolution that would condemn Zionism as colonialism and racism. They did not succeed in their first attempt, but the UN gratefully basically was a recipient of Soviet bigotry and propaganda. In November 75, Resolution 3379 condemned Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination, and it was finally passed. Now, all of these wonderful propaganda pieces about Israel is based on Nazi propaganda and Russian propaganda. So all of these people who are claiming that this is gospel truth are literally spreading Nazi propaganda and communist propaganda. And the Russians trained about 4,000 agents to go and teach this propaganda to the Arabs.
interesting. Why would they? Why would the Russians particularly have a stake in the fall of Israel?
Because they were embarrassed after the 1967 war. They trained, armed, and funded the Arab League, and yet they lost badly. And they were very, very embarrassed.
So
in fact, prior to that, but through all the other wars as well, they were allied with the Arabs, and especially after that period, they were very much humiliated, and they wanted revenge.
interesting.
So those people who think that they're talking gospel truth are very much supporting Soviet communism, which, if you can think of anything good about Soviet communism, I don't know what it was.
I honestly don't think anything good came of communism except for like a bunch of cool weapons like the AK-47, Zarbomba, and that's about it. And I guess that tells more about communism than what have you.
And you might want to also look. I mean, this is Putin right in the middle here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and don't forget, you've got online personalities, and we have mentioned this, like Adam Green, who doesn't discuss some of these more shady details, who doesn't go into the Islamic scripture, doesn't go into the ideology at all, doesn't discuss what's in the books or the example of Muhammad. Why does he not discuss these issues? Let me go into some of the things that Islam says about the Jews. And okay, so the Quran is 9% anti-Jewish. Okay, has 9% content that constitutes Jew hatred. Mein Kampf is only 7%.
Right. So my question then becomes, why do they hate the Jews so much?
So Muhammad said that he claimed to be the last in the line of the Jewish prophets, right, of the Christian and Jewish prophets. And the Christians, because he was using heretical Christian teachings, the Christians were like, we're not having any of this. And he went to the Jews and he said, hey, he used to pray towards Jerusalem at one point. Don't forget, before they started praying towards Mecca, they used to pray at one point towards Jerusalem as well. And because the Jews, when they questioned him about his knowledge of the Old Testament and of Jewish scripture and so on, history, he didn't know anything. They laughed at him, right? And he was humiliated, and for that he hated them, right? So
one of the claims also I've heard, and I've heard about certain Far East, like Chinese mosques that are no longer in I guess you could say in working order. Some of those mosques were built to point towards, I believe it was not Mecca, it was Petra.
Yeah. So the best person, there's a fantastic series of, there's Quranic geography by Dan Gibson. Brilliant research. This guy does some fantastic work. Definitely worth looking into Dan Gibson's videos on YouTube. He explains it in clear detail. But it seems that Petra would be the birthplace of Islam and not Mecca, because there's no historical or archaeological or geographical reason to believe Mecca was around at that time. So listen, so this quote, the Jews will support the false Messiah, and the Muslims, along with Jesus, the son of Mary, will kill the Jews. Right? That is according to Islam. Now, the Quran depicts the Jews as evil and bent on destroying the well-being of the Muslims, right? They're the strongest of all people in hatred towards the Muslims. They fabricate lies. They falsely ascribe lies to Allah. They claim Allah's power is limited. They love to listen to lies. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. Okay?
Just a bunch of hate and...
Yeah. Allah cursed disbelievers amongst the children of Israel. They're the cursed of God. Okay? As are the Christians. They are rats. Now, the apostles said, this is from the Islamics, from the Sirat Rasulullah, right, which is the biography of the Apostle of Allah. The Apostle said, and this is Muhammad, kill any Jew that falls into your power. So Mayisa Masood leapt upon Ibn Sunayna, a Jewish merchant with whom they had business relations, and killed him. Right? Now that story goes on. If you read the next paragraph, but see, his brother says to him, why would you kill that man? He was a friend of ours, and we've become wealthy and successful through his help. And he says, because Muhammad told me to do it, and if Muhammad had told me to kill you, my brother, I would have done it too.
God damn.
I am not kidding. And then his brother says, any religion which can cause you to do this is a very powerful religion, and he converts on the spot.
Damn. That's... Talk about cult of personality. I mean, fuck.
So, again, a couple of quotes from Sahih Muslim, which is from the Hadith, right? The Jews should know that the earth belongs to Allah and His Apostle, and I will expel you from this land, Arabia. Right? That's in Sahih Muslim 4363. And again, Umar heard the Messenger of Allah say, I will expel the Jews and the Christians from Arabia, and I will not leave any but Muslims. Within 3 years of Muhammad's death, Arabia had been cleansed of any but Muslims.
Damn.
And it goes on and on. I mean, so that's just a little bit of what's in there. Okay. And also, in 1925, okay, this is a I will show you this as well. This is the guide. This is the 1925 guide to the. It's called Al-Haram Al-Harif. Right. This is the 1925 guide to the Temple Mount that was published by the Islamic Supreme Council, the Supreme Muslim Council of Jerusalem.
You have a lot of sources, man. This is like. Wow.
Yeah.
This is professional stuff. I mean, I source Wikipedia when it has good sources, of course. Wikipedia itself is not a good source, but you've done your work, man. Props.
Thank you. I have hundreds of pages of data now. I have lots of stuff, and yeah, this is all searchable, and it's all. So this is the scan of the original book. Okay, notice what it says here in one of the chapters. Okay, and this is in the book right here, right? They talk about the Temple Mount, and people claim that. So Muhammad very bluntly says, and I can go back and read other longer passages that say that he goes to the Jews and says, "I'm going to kick you out of Arabia," right? Right. So what we have is, let me just go to the top here. It says, the site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest, perhaps prehistoric times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. This too is the spot, according to universal belief, on which David built there an altar unto the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Now the SMC, the Supreme Muslim Council, was headed at the time by Hitler's friend and Nazi ally, Haj Amin al-Husseini. Here they admit very openly that this was Jewish territory, and they invaded it and took it. Okay, it goes on to say in the year 637 AD, the Caliph Omar invaded Jerusalem, right? And this is the place to which the Prophet was supposedly taken one night by the horse creature thing, Burak, right? And he was taken to heaven.
Is that the flying horse? I don't know what it is.
Except this was about 50 years. Except this happened about 50 to 60 years before a mosque was built on the site. It was very much Jewish at that point. And remember, they invaded. That mosque was built in, I think, 692. So there's no way that he could have taken off from a mosque at that location when Muhammad was alive, because there was no mosque there. Right? And yet from this rock had the Prophet, according to tradition, ascended to heaven on his steed. Yeah.
Damn.
So they admit that this was originally a Jewish location, and yet today this is so much in question.
Yeah, because I was watching Todd's work about, I believe it was the Statue of Liberty at one point, and how it was supposedly based off of a Muslim woman. And
it is, yeah, correct.
I've always thought it was based off of the Colossus of Rhodes, if you know what that is. I don't. The reason I bring that up simply is because there's a term that the leftists often use, the left SJWs use. It's called cultural appropriation, and what that essentially means is that you you have to like respect different cultures. You cannot, wear dreadlocks because those are black people's culture, what have you. But from what I understand, Islam seems to be appropriating a lot of other cultures, adding them in, and then altering their history, making it like a revisionist history that Hermes Trismegistus was just a Muslim before Allah came down or Muhammad went up to heaven and got the Quran.
Correct. Islam is supremacist. In fact, we're all born as Muslims, and to come to earth, we have to accept Allah as our God. And unfortunately, we forget that when we're born, so we don't convert, we revert to Islam. So notice here, the Statue of Liberty was originally a Muslim woman, and this is on the Smithsonian website.
I'm going to be pushing back a little bit against this particular article, because from what I understand is that this particular ad or this particular information, the model was based off of a Muslim woman. It was the type of...
True, I've read other articles on the subject as well, but it was originally meant to be hosted in Egypt.
Well, from what I understand, yes, there was going to be the whole Suez Canal, colossus, so to speak, but then they wanted to make it over here. And, for example, the head was supposed to be more of the statue of Helios. Helios, which was the Colossus of Rhodes. So I think this is sort of like a combination of the two. And I've shared this with Jan before and a bunch of other people. Apparently... Again, I think this is more of a debate thing, but we don't have to debate it right now. I just don't think that this is factually the case, because it's like the equivalent of me saying to you that Mona Lisa is a painting of a Christian woman. Statistically speaking, it might be
true. No, that's fine. That's understandable. It's not a big issue, but it's just an interesting little point to note. Let me maybe switch subjects. Maybe we can talk. Remember we spoke yesterday about contributions to infiltration of education institutions.
Oh yeah. We could talk about that. We'll talk about that.
So,
that last segment actually reminded me of the appropriation of saying that the Statue of Liberty was based on a Muslim woman. That reminds you of this little clip here.
Yeah, play it, Luke.
If I can get it to play.
Jesus is a black man. They know that in his hometown.
Beethoven,
Black.
Mozart, black. Henry VIII,
Black.
William Shakespeare.
Undoubtedly black.
My God.
For those of you who don't know what that's from, that is from a lot of these Pan-African nationalists, I guess they can call them. They were basically a bunch of people who are revisionists who say that Beethoven was black, Marx was black, because they have a certain hairstyle to them and what have you. It's a lot of it's just pseudo, I wouldn't say pseudo-intellectual stuff. It's just propaganda.
And if we're correct, for blunt, it's basically a form of, I guess you could call it black supremacy.
Yeah.
With this desire to try to say that all things belong to a particular race or culture, even though they have nothing to do with it, for the sake of dominating and conquering it.
Well, there's two sides to that. There's one is the supremacy, because they want some sort of pride in, even if they have to steal it. But also, it's also a matter of the destruction of Western values in Western history, because they perceive that Westerners got successful through theft.
Okay, I mean, that's totally not true, but, I mean...
Yeah, that is the norm. That is not unusual. The common perception within black cultures, at least within Africa. That's what I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
Which is Marxist when you think about it.
Very much, yeah. Yeah, but that's been pushed, understand? So, for instance, these migrants that are coming into Europe hate Europe. They hate white people. They hate your culture. And many of those coming to America, same thing. That's why they don't integrate.
Yeah, that's why I'm more of a nativist than I am a pick identity politics here nationalist.
Yeah. So, am I answering the kinds of questions that you am I touching on good points?
Yeah.
And,
dude, you're doing perfectly. a lot of this stuff, again, I have nothing to respond it to because I have nothing. I don't have enough knowledge on the subject to make a reasonable rebuttal to any of these things. But I think that a lot of this stuff will just be getting data out there, so followers of yours, Jan's, and mine can look into this stuff. It's just raw data right now, and getting information to look into.
Truth said that the lie gets halfway around the world before the truth even gets its pants on, right? So very few people, we're one of the first to start to really research these narratives and discover their falsehood, right? And then to go back and examine what are the facts. Well, what can we verify? I mean, what can we reliably verify? And we're finding that just about everything is false. Right, and the waters have been muddied extensively, so we are starting to tie these threads together and starting to put together something that we can prove is, to a very high degree, this is the truth, right? And a lot of it leads back to Islam and communism and propaganda. So one of the things I'll get to, I'll go back and again to the Talmud, because you did ask me about lies about the Talmud, and I'll talk about some of the specific lies about the Talmud, the fake quotes versus the real quotes. I will go through some of that. But also I want to mention some of the funding. For instance, people talk about the Fed, that the Jews, Israel owns the Fed. People talk about Israel. They talk about Hasbara, which is the basically Israeli goodwill outreach program. But they don't talk about Dawah, which is the Islamic evangelization goodwill outreach program, which is very, very, very political. Right now, the Russians, at the height of their power during the Cold War, were spending their budget was $1 billion per year on promoting on the Soviet communist propaganda.
And that's in U.S. dollars, not
dollar value. Whereas Saudi Arabia alone is spending $2 to $3 billion a year. So their budget is up to 3 times that of the Soviet Union to promote Islamic propaganda. And not just any, their Salafi, their Wahhabist propaganda. Right? People need to know this. They're spreading their particular Wahhabist ideology. And they're spending billions, more so than the Soviet Union did. That money's going somewhere. So let's take a tiny country like Qatar briefly. We spoke about this yesterday, so let's have a brief look. So taxpayer money this is in the last 18 months, right? Israeli interests have donated a total of $13 million to 8 schools that have Middle East studies programs, right? Now, taxpayer money that was paid to these Middle East studies programs totaled $597,500.
right.
Israeli money, right? We have here $507,000 for that particular school, right? But the total from Islamic countries was $18,569,000, right? That is significant. That's 36 times more. Right. If you look at the total, now if we look at the total amount of money that's been spent over the last 18 months, right, Israel spent approximately $13.5 million on universities, right?
Right.
That alone spent $377 million.
And this money comprises of training people, getting subject matter, printing books, grants and scholarships and what have you.
You name it, to make goodwill and funding. This money goes into university think tanks, it goes into Islamic studies programs, goes into whatever, but basically to buy goodwill. People say nice things, right? So hence, think about it. If someone has just given you $50 million to your small university, aren't you going to be nice to them? Who runs your program then?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I don't take money or super chats is because I don't want to be bought by anybody,
Well, I mean, let's look at this, okay? U.S. taxpayer funding, Middle East studies, okay? Georgetown University, taxpayer funding, $484,000. Funding from Muslim nations, $377 million. George Washington University, $258,000, taxpayer funding. Funding from Muslim nations, $100 million. New York University, 537,000 taxpayers, 81 million Muslim nations. Right? This is crazy. Now think, Universities took $600 million tied to Muslim nations while forming grade school curricula for US students. That's not university funding, that's grade school.
So that's
That's
K through 12, right?
That's young minds. That's young minds indoctrinated into Islam.
Well, young minds that will be receiving funding, and they will try to push it, assuming that they will try to do it. It may not be so overt, but it definitely is a conflict of interest given the ideology of those countries.
Correct. So understand. So why are we hearing about Israel is so bad, the Jews are so bad, the Jews have all the money in the world? If you look at the GDP of Israel, Saudi Arabia's GDP is more than double. It's more than twice. It's about $700 billion, going on $700 billion, right? Saudi's floating on oil, right? So this is Saudi alone. Why are we not hearing about their funding? Why are we not hearing about their dawah? Why are we not hearing, if Islam is a bad thing, and some of these people will tell you, yeah, well, Islam is a false religion, Islam is bad. They have these little talking points, but they'll never attack it. They'll do a limited hangout, right? They'll never attack it. So if Islam is so bad, why is it never discussed in detail? Why are they always pointing at Israel? Israel doesn't have that kind of money, right? And we can prove that the Islamic countries are spending 10, 20, 30, 40 times the money that Israel can afford on spreading Islam, on their Wahhabist Islam. Why is that not discussed? What is the problem? Why is Adam Green, why are Owen Benjamin not able to discuss this? They have more time and more money than I do, as far as I can tell, to do this, right? We do this voluntarily. Why aren't they discussing it? And if we start digging, what are we going to discover?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what to say. But I want to clarify something real quick. I
Sure.
know Jan. I don't own you. Just because I give super chats doesn't mean I own you. It's not what I'm trying to get across. I just want to put my money where my mouth is. It's one thing for some guy with an anime avatar on YouTube or Twitter to talk smack, but if he puts $5 down and talks smack, there's some. You either accept it or you move on. That's all it is. It's not me trying to subvert you or own you or anything like that. I want to make that clear. I just want to put my money where my mouth is. That way there's some level of weight to what I say. And there I also have to choose my words carefully, you know.
Yeah. So are there any questions from the audience that you want to mention, anything that they've said?
Well, so far it's been a lot of yawn. Justin, there has been...
Leave some room for other people.
What's
I should leave some room for other people.
Well, I only have 6 people watching currently right now. Oftentimes when I run these hangouts or podcasts, it's at 8 p.m. and I'm competing with a bunch of other people within my clique, if that makes any sense.
That's understandable. So what I've raised here in terms of the funding that goes into U.S. institutions, right, that goes into indoctrinating young minds into adopting Islam or seeing them favorably. You know, why are we always hearing about the Hasbaras thing, but we never hear about the Dawah? You know, why is that not discussed? And why are people looking at the funding? I mean, you got to follow the money, and unfortunately, there's a lot more Islamic money coming in than anything in terms of Israeli funding.
Right. Yeah, that right there. The numbers don't lie.
I've got some comparisons here. So, for instance, okay, so here I've got some comparisons. Taxpayer money for all Middle East studies groups, right? 7.5 million. Muslim countries, 603 million. Funds from Israel, 13 million and 26,000. That is significantly more.
Yeah,
that's 40 times.
Yeah, that's a lot. That is. Yeah, that. I mean, what can I say?
Right. Another thing to discuss is the idea of the Fed. Now, I have my own ideas. I mean, if everything I've been reading so far is generally a lie, then what else is a lie, right? So people talk about the Fed, and I think a fair amount. Look, I'm sure that if the Fed is audited, we'll find some financial irregularities, just like we would if we had to examine the Soviet Union's books or Venezuela's books. I'm sure we'd find that a lot of the money in Cuba went to Castro, right? No doubt. And those systems failed a lot harder. The U.S. has been the most successful, wealthiest, and has created the most wealth for its citizens in any country in history, right? So if the Fed is bad, it's doing fine, well, but it's still doing an extremely good job of making U.S. citizens wealthy people and providing for the country, right? So I think a lot of that is exaggeration, and a lot of that is people who say, well, hate your country, hate capitalism, because, man, have we got communism for you, right? So they've been propagandizing people to hate their country, hate their system. Capitalism is bad. It only pulls when China adopted capitalism as a financial ideology, right? Even though the government is still very much communist, they lifted, within 20 years, they lifted almost half their population out of poverty. India has lifted 270 million people out of poverty in the last 5 or 10 years, simply because of adopting capitalist policies. Kenya is booming simply for doing the same, for following the American capitalist model. Right? They're creating incentives, they're creating business, they're creating money. So how is the Fed so bad? I'm sure there's some problems, but you know what? It's not as bad as people make out. I think that's mostly a bullshit argument. Whereas if you look at communist countries, well, there aren't any successful ones unless you want to go to North Korea, Venezuela, and enjoy the dark, starry nights and living on rats. But we'll look at who owns the Fed. Right? Who invests in the Fed? Who controls the Fed? If we look, people talk about Israel. So recently, President Trump has made some changes, and there has to be reporting now from the Fed. Israel sits at number 31, well below the UK, well below Korea, well below Canada, well below Norway. Right? Number 31. Saudi Arabia was previously lumped in with OPEC, and it's recently been broken out, and they have consistently remained 11, 12, 13, 11, 12, 13, always modifying their investment to always remain just outside the top 10, so they don't appear in the reporting, because the standard reporting would always put out the top 10. So they always make sure, however, they were part of OPEC, and because they're the leader of the Ummah, the Islamic community, they also, we can assume that they are working through OPEC countries and they're working through other Islamic countries. So if you look at the amount of money put in by the UAE, Kuwait, and other countries like that, you start adding that up, already they are significantly higher. So let's look at what Israel has invested in the Fed. Israel, 36 billion, right? And if we look at Saudi Arabia, 179 billion. So we're looking at 5 times more already. Now you start adding the UAE into that, you start adding Kuwait, you start adding Bahrain, you start adding Brunei, you start adding other countries in, right? Now that number starts to add up. And then, of course, what we have is, notice we have Luxembourg sitting here at number 6 or 7, and Cayman Islands right behind it. Okay, Luxembourg, Cayman Islands. Those are funds. No one knows who's in those funds.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know that Cayman Islands, there were, I think it was in Panama, the Panama Papers, they spoke about the Cayman Islands a bit. They spoke about certain funds and coming from the Cayman Islands. It's always been a shady place.
We're busy working on this, and I mean, if people want to dive into this, that would be great. If anyone who listens to this ultimately wants to dive into this and start digging, I bet you're going to start finding Islamic investors. Right? So look at this. Luxembourg, 229 billion. Cayman Islands, 216 billion. Now, are you going to tell me that number 31 has more voting rights than number 11, number 15, number 20? Number 12? No, they don't. So that story needs to be looked at more closely, and people are lying about this. Quite bluntly, people are lying.
This is heavy. This is some heavy shit, man. I mean, yeah, God. I mean, wow.
So Belgium invests more money. Now Belgium doesn't exactly have large oil deposits the last I checked. Belgium is what, number 8? $180 billion? $190.5 billion. That is still about 9 times more than Israel puts in. How do they do that if they, the oil money?
Well, I mean, they have weapons. I mean, they have like the Scar H, and they have a bunch of other cool guns. But other than that, I don't know much. Maybe waffles? I don't know.
The verified numbers that we have, the facts that we have, the data that we can access, does not support any of the conspiracy theories about Israel. I can't find it. So now that with this out the way, I can touch on some of the lies about the Talmud, go into a few of those, and we can talk about the USS Liberty as well.
Okay, we could could talk about that. That's awesome. Yeah.
So, any comments from you, Luke? Any thoughts from you?
Oh, in regards to the question, yeah. The one we brought up yesterday was all the comparisons to all the references to Jesus, which you kind of mentioned in the Jesus and the Talmud passage about how. But what's really interesting about that passage is like how off the wall it is and how completely obscure the references are. It kind of makes you stop and wonder, what do I really know about the Talmud exactly?
Exactly. We spent 3.5 months reading it. You understand how much time and work we had to put in to do the series on it? It was an enormous amount of work. We spent months reading it. I mean, we spent hundreds of hours. So yeah, and people, why do they never quote the full passages? Why do they always just quote a few words? And I'll show some examples now. Do you have anything else you want to add, Luke, or comment or question?
Well, I guess I really appreciate what you've been doing so far in your presentation, because even though what you're going over with Islam is something I've kind of known like for many years now, but it's kind of gone to the back burner because the mainstream media doesn't really talk about that much. But it also, this conversation is kind of undermining any kind of quasi-religious messaging that could meet the people on the religious grounds to have anti-Semitic views, because that's really what the Talmud argument does.
Correct. It tries to divorce the Jews from the Bible. It tries to imply that they have a different book, not the Bible. Now, there are criticisms that you can, let's say, legitimately make as a Christian who wants to do apologetics or have a debate with a Jew, right? A rabbinic Jew, right? Which would be part of the heritage of the Pharisees. So, but then one should do this on a, shall we say, a logical ground, not on a hysterical ground, which is what it currently is. So, for instance, there's a very common thing. If a Jew finds an object lost by a Goy, it does not have to be returned. And Bava Metzia 24a. So you'll find typically it's these very short, paraphrased comments. Now, on the right here is just a section. This is a short section, and I'm scrolling through from the Talmud discussing this. Okay? You'll notice this is not the entire section from the Talmud. Okay? This is just a piece. This is probably like a tenth of the actual discussion on that point. And someone has taken 10 words out of it and said, there you go, guilty. Do you understand the problem with this? Can you see? Now, so let's look at this. So this is a discussion. It's a series of debates. It's a series of questions that are posed, which are trying to discover how does the law apply in this example, and in that example, and in this example. And it goes through dozens and dozens and dozens of different examples. What if it's something owned by a Gentile? What if it's something owned by a Jew? What if it's in a Jewish location? What if it's in a synagogue? What if it's in the market? What if it's in the main street? What if it's in a Gentile area? What if it's in a church? What if it's... Do you understand? These are the questions that are being posed. So... things. In the case of one who finds a lost item in a main thoroughfare or a large plaza or any place where multitudes are found, those items belong to the finder because the owner will despair of their recovery. In other words, if you lose something in Times Square, you lose your wallet in Times Square, or whatever, you lose $50 or something, your cell phone, the chances of finding it are slim. It's almost, and even if you are a good Samaritan who wants to return it, right, the chances of you finding the owner are slim because it's such a busy place with so many people that you're not going to find it. So it doesn't specify Jew or Gentile. It just says, look, I mean, what's the chances? It said, look, if there's no chance of finding the owner, keep the damn thing. And it goes on to state, even in a place where there is a majority of Jews, he also says that the item belongs to him who found it. So there's the implication that this is valid for Gentiles but not to Jews. But it very bluntly says in the Talmud, even if it's the item belonging to a Jew, keep it. Because if you can't find the owner, well, too bad. I mean, you can't. It's not practical, so just keep it. Right? It goes on. Rabbi Shimon says, even in a place where there's a majority of Jews, such as synagogues and study halls, or places frequented by Jews, still keep it. Even if it's a place where lots of Jews go. So even if a Jew finds something belonging to a Jew, well, keep it. So the same rule applies with a Jew or Gentile. It's just a matter of practicality. Okay? They talk also about, what about a case where the coins are scattered? There's no identifying mark on coins, so keep it, because you don't know there's no name written on the coin, right? It goes on to say, the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and he stated his opinion, even in a place where there's a majority of Jews, keep the item, right? Let's go down to the bottom. With regards to one who left a stolen item to his children, right? his heirs are obligated to pay the owner. That is the Jewish law. And this is the exegesis of the law of Moses from the Sinai covenant. Right? And it says, it refers even to a cow that he plows with or a donkey that he drives by directing it, which the heirs are obligated to return. So, theft. So, from the fact that the heirs must return a cow and a donkey, one can infer that they must also return a bed and a table. So, theft is outlawed in Judaism. The ethics of Christian.
Okay, that is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that didn't know about, and I'm just taking it in. There's nothing else I could really respond to. I don't know how to reply. Just accept it and move on. I mean, that's
so
all.
So the Talmud is simply an expansion, a legal expansion, in this case, upon Deuteronomy 22, verse 1. You shall surely return them. That is the obligation to return a lost object. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt bring them again unto thy brother. You want to return things. And in this case, the brother is not just a Jew. Now, don't forget, Islam divides the world into Kafirs and Muslims, believers and non-believers. A non-believer can be cheated, can be lied to. Right? Whereas in Judaism, that is not the case. I will give you one more example. Right? Sorry, do you have any questions or comments?
None so far, but basically, from what I can understand and what I've stated before, is that it is a how should you say it? It is a the Talmud seems to be at least a book of case law, and it's not meant to be read linearly. It's meant to be studied. If
Correct.
That's correct.
That is perfectly correct. Yes, you're right. I mean, you've done your homework as well, which is why you actually have a fairly solid grasp of this. So listen to this then. So these are derived from Psalm 15:5 and from Deuteronomy 23:21. Okay, which says you may lend to an outsider with interest. It is prohibited to oppress. Now this is an instruction to the Jews. It is prohibited to oppress, rob, or steal, even from a non-Jew. Interest. Okay, interest right here. Interest, which is given with his knowledge and consent, is permitted.
Right.
Okay, so interest, so lending with interest, which is given with knowledge and consent, is permitted. Now, of course, the church was dumb enough back in the Middle Ages to disallow lending with interest to Christians. Right. So Christians didn't venture into the business because it wasn't worthwhile. So unfortunately, this left the opportunity wide open for the Jews, who jumped on it and made a profit.
Right.
Right. So there's a very simple explanation for that. They simply that's the fault of the church, right? And they became simply very good at that. That was just an opportunity they had, and they jumped on it. So blame the church for that. So now notice this: we are not obligated to extend kindness or to lend the Gentiles money for free, because generally speaking, they hate Jews. Now this was opinion at the time, right? Based on the reigning political circumstances when this was written by the rabbis. But if a non-Jew treats a Jew with kindness and favor, the Jew is obligated to return the kindness and do him favors in return.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed. I have a few friends who are Jewish. Some of them lifelong friends. Some of them are just people I've met over the years, and they've always been good to me. They've always shown respect and kindness in return. You know.
Remember, we just read. I just told you earlier that the Jew is to love the stranger because they were strangers in Egypt.
Right.
Understand? This is part of the ethics. This is literally part of the Jewish ethics, which informs and should inform Christian ethics, because Jews are to be a witness to the world about the law and the morality of God. That is the burden of the Jew. Right? Now, notice, for instance. This is Owen Benjamin, and
yeah, a lot of people in the dissident right, the alt-right, the white nationalist circles, they have mixed opinions. A lot of it about Owen is that I've seen people. Are you familiar with the Revenge of the Cis podcast?
No.
Okay, well, they say that Owen is basically losing his frickin' mind, and I'm inclined to believe him, given all the things he's shown.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. So go on, please.
So, like, I've always thought the guy was just needed help. Like, he got red pilled, term we use in the dissident right and manosphere and things such as that, about what was going on, and then he starts going into the whole moon landing and a bunch of other stuff. Which again, it's good to have a little bit of intellectual, curiosity. But when he starts, just bashing the Jews because Jew, hate, without actually, trying to give without any sort of backing to it. Like, you've done your research. Like, I would love to get you next to Owen Benjamin and debate. I would love to see you do that.
I think I could mop the floor with him with regards to this.
You could, but even then, like, sometimes there's another young, I guess you could say Republican or dissident right man by the name of Nicholas J. Fuentes. I don't know if you ever seen America First, but he was going to debate Owen, and then Owen called him out. Nick replied, and then Owen backed down. So I don't think Owen Benjamin is a good source, but he's slowly losing his mind. He's like the crazy cabin in the woods, Grizzly Adams sort of person.
He is starting to look demented to me, but that's a different issue. I mean, I'm disappointed in him. I'm very disappointed, and yeah. So look, this is something that he said, right? And I can play the clip. I have them here. This is 2 samples of the, I mean, he's a funny guy, but he's melting down. So anyway, if you think that they have to tell the truth, you have to understand that in the Talmud they say, let me quote it, Jews may use lies to circumvent a Gentile. That's in Baba Kama 113a. That's literally what he says, and I can play the clip. It's in this clip right here, right? So that's exactly what he says. So let me go to the Talmud, and let's look at what the Talmud actually says. So the Talmud, the Mishnah, is discussing a customs collector who has no limitation placed upon him by the governor for the amount he may collect. In other words, this is a tax collector who's working without restraint, and he's abusing his authority, and essentially he collects as he pleases. He's robbing people, basically, right? In this case, they say, look, then you need to think, what do I pay this guy? I'm not going to pay him unfairly, so let me pay him what I think is due and not the rest. Those who hate Jews will twist anything the Jews do, no matter what, to make it look bad, right? So, and then another rabbi says, a different rabbi, alternatively, the sages of the school of Rabbi Yanai said, the Mishnah is discussing a customs collector who stands on his own. He was not appointed by the government, but on his own, and he forces people to give him money, another thief. Those are the 2 contexts, right? Why do people always have these paraphrased comments here? Why do they never quote the actual Talmud? Why do they never take the passage straight out of the Talmud and quote that? Now, let me go to the bottom here.
Well, I would imagine it's either out of ignorance or it's out of
malice.
Malice, yeah, or error even. I mean, again, maybe they don't know that there's an extra quote to it or an extra paragraph. There's always that possibility.
I've never read it. Yeah.
Yep.
So, and it goes on. There's a third context that is provided here. Okay, in the case of a Jew and a Gentile, this is Rabbi Ashi. In the case of a Jew and a Gentile who approach the court for judgment in a legal dispute, he says, if you can vindicate the Jew under Jewish law, vindicate him, and say to the Gentile, this is our law. If he can be vindicated under Gentile law, vindicate him and say to the Gentile, this is your law. And if it is not possible to vindicate him under either system, one approaches the case circuitously, seeking a justification to vindicate the Jew. In other words, to rule in favor of the Jew, even if it's unfair, right? This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. However, Rabbi Akiva, who is the preeminent rabbi, right, disagrees. And it says here very clearly, he disagrees, and he says, one does not approach the case circuitously in order to vindicate the Jew, due to the sanctification of God's name, as God's name will be desecrated if the Jewish judge employs dishonest means.
So in this case, it would be an opinion. One rabbi saying, it's okay to do it this time. Then the other one saying, well, no, that's not the right way to do it. So they're having a dialogue back and forth of why they think it's acceptable to do.
And that is the Talmud, dialogue back and forth. And sometimes they don't have a conclusion. In this case, there is a conclusion by the senior rabbi.
Interesting. The senior rabbi, i.e., the person who came after or before.
He's the most. Rabbi Akiva is one of the most highly regarded rabbis, one of the earliest rabbis, and he's the most highly regarded of the rabbis. His rulings are taken as gospel, as law, basically.
Okay.
And he disagrees with you. Now, sometimes these questions are raised purely as a debate point. How do you apply the law to this? It's a question for students. Sometimes it's not an actual ruling. It's merely a question. Here's a problem. What do you think?
So they're playing devil's advocate, quite literally, in this regard.
Often that is the case, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. I can relate. I play devil's advocate quite a lot myself.
So they mention Christians that intercourse with animals or non or Gentiles are guilty of bestiality. That's Avodah Zarah 22a. So let's have a look at this one, and let's just kill this one dead once and for all. So the Mishnah says, one may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality. Right? It goes on to say, since even Gentiles are prevented or prohibited from engaging in bestiality, a Jew who places his animal there is guilty of violating the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, which is from Leviticus. However, the commentary on that, right, is with regard to the assumption that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality, the Gemara raises a contradiction, right? One may purchase an animal from Gentiles for use as an offering, and there is no concern that it might be unfit due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to it being an animal that was the object of bestiality, or due to having it set aside for idol worship, right? It says a Gentile protects and thereby spares his own animal so that it will not become barren. An act of bestiality may cause an animal to become barren, thus there is no concern that the Gentile engaged in immoral behavior with it.
All right. So, I guess what the notion is they're trying to figure out who if the animal is fit for a sacrifice, and the reason they're saying Christians have intercourse with animals is they're assuming that in some cultures Gentiles will use, like we're talking like pagan gods and what have you, will sacrifice and use animals for really really sick shit. And they're concerned about the sacrifice of the animal, the well-being of the animal, and the fitness for the sacrifice. Is that correct?
So they're providing different potential circumstances that might disqualify an animal, right? Can we buy an animal from a Gentile? And one guess says, well, we think this, right? Because maybe the Babylonians were screwing their sheep. I mean, whatever, maybe they were buying it from Australians, right? I take that back. Okay, so however, the definitive statement at the end is that no, this is not a concern. Gentiles do not perform bestiality, and it's not in their interest to do so. But someone has taken the question, right, and taken that as a definitive statement. And of course, they did not quote it in its entirety. They merely quoted a paraphrase, edited version of it. And this is common across, the best of Gentiles kill. That's a reference to the book of Exodus, and that's referring to the Egyptians, right? And in this case, in fact, there was a battle between the Jews who were being persecuted and killed by the Egyptians. They had a battle and they won, but what happened was the ones that they trusted, the Egyptians that they trusted, also turned on them and attacked them. And God said, well, these are the best of the Gentiles in Egypt 2,000-3,000 years ago. You're going to have to kill them too because they're coming for you as well. You're going to have to fight them. That's what it refers to. It doesn't refer to go and kill the Christians. But this is how it's twisted. Understand? This is very, very common. So anyone can go read Exodus 14:7. You'll see that term there. It's from the Bible. And where does the Bible say Jews go kill the Christians? It doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't say that. It says, if anything, it sees everybody as equal in the eyes of God and equal of redemption, from what I can gather. Yeah.
So there's lots of things. Like someone quoted today, so someone mentioned the child of a Gentile is an animal, right? And it just says this: the legal status of a convert who just converted is like that of a child just born, and all his previous family relationships are disregarded whether from his father's side or from his mother's side.
Right.
You've joined a new family. You've left your old family, you've joined a new family. That's all it is. You're like a newborn in a new family.
Right.
And then people go and they just mess with this. You understand? That's all that happens, right? And the whole thing about so there's a section here about twin brothers, and there's a section about anyway. So yeah, but they take other things out of context and they claim that this is what it says, and this is absolutely not the case.
Right.
So, any questions about this, Luke? Any comments from you?
Well, nothing more to comment on. It's just like, as I said, nothing more I said before, but it's just, there is just so much information to go, because I understand why so much days, months and research went into this, because there's just so much to go over and so much to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can talk about the USS Liberty. We can switch, because I think I've proved my case. At least I've made my point in that the Talmud.
At the very least, you've given people a starting point, because it's a good starting point to people know this is how you actually read the Talmud and how people can examine the Talmud, which is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I'll do one last one. Sanhedrin 59a. A Gentile who pries into the law, the Talmud, is guilty of death or deserves death, or any Gentile who reads the Torah must be killed. You know, there's a common, that quote goes around a lot. And because the question is asked in Sanhedrin 59a, verse 3 to 4, a Gentile who studies the Torah robs the Jewish people of it, right? So this is, one of the rabbis says, so someone who reads the Jewish book robs the Jewish people of this heritage, right? And he says the punishment of a Gentile who studies Torah is execution by stoning, right? So that is the question that is posed, right? And it says here the Gemara raises an objection from, and this is from Rabbi Yohanan, okay, who says a Gentile who engages in Torah study is like a high priest. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my ordinances, which if a man does, he shall live by them. So a Gentile who engages in Torah study is considered like a high priest.
All right.
That is.
Sorry, yeah? I was going to say, so in essence, one of the rabbis is saying, well, this Gentile may not see and treat the Talmud or the Torah with I guess a great regard, or let's say with
should be respect. Basically.
Yeah, they would treat it with disrespect. But then another rabbi will come in and say, well, now hang on, he's trying to learn. Let's treat him like a high priest. Let's treat him with respect.
Well, because in Leviticus, God says, keep my laws and my statutes. So a Gentile who wants to keep God's laws and therefore reads what they are is respecting God. And therefore, this man must be treated with the respect you would give to a priest, because he's trying to learn and abide by God's law. So therefore, they're giving him great respect. This is exactly the opposite of the implication made by people who lie about it.
Right. Yeah, sorry about that, Jan. Again, my mic is a little bit... I have to be really, really close to the mic. It's a Blue Yeti mic, so yeah, I'm sorry about that.
But yeah, I'm using my laptop today, though my Blue Yeti's not linked up. Because I'm on my laptop today. My PC is still in the shop, as you know.
All right.
So does that clarify a lot of what's going on here? I mean, we can go through dozens and dozens, literally dozens of these. But I think that should clarify that people are lying about the Talmud through and through.
All right. I think we could put that at least. We have enough of a reason to not go after. Well, to question the official narrative about the Talmud. We can look into it now and things such as that.
Okay.
I think you've done a good service now. Oh.
Yeah. So I can mention finally maybe the USS Liberty incident, which is a very commonly thrown around idea that the audience might find useful to get some of the facts about the incident.
All right. I thought you and Jan were going to do something about that. I don't want to approach the topic.
It's fine. I think I think it's okay. I appreciate the forum you're giving me and the chance to get this out to your listeners, and to you're willing to listen, and give me a hearing. People are obviously free to. I've given you the documents. I will be turning this into documents, passing it out so you can send it to people. They can check the references. The difference is that I think we are very clear in our citations, and we want people to check the evidence.
Right. That's good. That's good, because it has to be open to the public. A lot of I've seen certain claims of people will say, "Oh, well, it's not the real Talmud. It's hidden underneath I think it's the dome of the rock," and a bunch of
Show us
old,
the copy of the Talmud they're quoting. Please give me a copy of the one you're quoting from.
yeah, exactly. And so far you've been nothing but open, nothing but cordial, nothing but good and open about this discussion, and I appreciate that very much.
No, thank you. Yeah, so okay. The USS Liberty, and some people say, what about the USS Liberty? And they talk about the day Israel attacked America, right? So a spy ship, the US spy ship in the Med was attacked by Israeli planes and torpedo boats. 171 injured, I believe 28 dead, and it was officially classified as an error. Essentially, it was a friendly fire incident, right? So there were 10 inquiries. Now, I don't know why the people who discuss this always say, what about the USS Liberty, but never go into greater depth.
Well, what about the USS Liberty? That should be the real question. What about it? Like, why are you bringing it up?
Yeah. So what happened was, this was at the start of the Six-Day War. Israel communicated with the US and said, please evacuate US ships from the area, or provide us the coordinates of your vessels so that we can avoid attacking your vessels by accident. Right? So there were Egyptian ships that were attacking the shore, right, of Tel Aviv, and so there were standing orders. There were standing orders at that time by Yitzhak Rabin, if I recall, to attack any ships on site if they were in the area and they were attacking. So let me just go to this. The formal finding is that the attack was a friendly fire incident, an error. There were 10 official United States investigations and there were 3 Israeli inquiries. They all established the attack was a mistake. Okay, it occurred in the midst of a full-scale war and there were fog of war conditions. On the day the fighting began, Israel asked that the American ships be removed from its coast or that it be notified of the location of the vessels.
Can you define what you mean by the fog of war? Just for I have an idea of what it means.
Just the confusion of what's going on. There's so much data coming in. It's so hard to keep track of them. There's so many moving parts. There's so much confusion. You don't have accurate information. You're just fighting on so many fronts. They were fighting 6 different armies, right?
Right.
Or 5 different armies, the Arab League. So they were fighting on every front. And so they just couldn't keep track of everything. So they said, look, I mean, so to prevent friendly fire, that's what they asked for this information. So the 6th Fleet was moved because President Johnson feared being drawn into a confrontation with the Soviet Union, who was funding these people. Don't forget, training and arming the Arab League. He ordered that no aircraft be sent near Sinai. And also the United States had announced that it had no naval forces within hundreds of miles of the battlefront on the floor of the United Nations. However, the USS Liberty, an American intelligence ship, didn't get the message. That was a failure on the part of the US Navy. Right? That was a failure on the part of the US Navy. I'm going to be showing some declassified NSA documents, which show this was a fault of the US Navy Communications Department. Right? So anyway,
wow. You've done your research, man. Wow.
Oh yeah, I have a ton of documents on this one. No, so I can back up everything I say here. I can bury people in citations and facts and documents and research. So on the 4th day, the High Command received the reports that Israeli troops were being fired upon from the sea, presumably by an Egyptian vessel, which had done the same the previous day. The Israelis thought that this ship was doing the shelling, the Liberty, and they sent warplanes and torpedo boats. They killed 34 members and wounded 171. Now the ship, it was a clear day, there was no wind and the flag wasn't flying, but also the ship was doing 28 knots. Now, according to American military doctrine and also Israeli military doctrine, a ship at that speed is considered to be an attack boat, right? It's going too fast for a normal vessel, so it's clearly it's either trying to flee the scene or going on attack. So they attacked the boat, right? What happened was the pilots were very confused as to why the ship wasn't shooting back. And when they did start shooting back, they took a little close, and that's when the torpedo boats went in to defend the planes. Right? When the Liberty did start shooting back at the planes, the PT boats went in, and that's when one of the torpedoes hit the boat and unfortunately killed the cryptographic crew, right? So what happened was the Captain Commander William McGonigal testified that the flag was knocked down after the first or second assault of the plane. So there was no way to identify the flag. Now Yitzhak Rabin, he says there were standing orders to attack any unidentified vessel near the shore. He was then chief of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. Okay, so they responded. They unfortunately killed 28 sailors with the torpedo boat attack. The moment that they noticed that there was a mistake, right? The moment they discovered there was a mistake, right? They called the U.S. ambassador, they called the president, and they immediately evac. I mean, they sent helicopters with doctors and supplies and medical care to the ship and started evacuating people, right? So there was immediate communication. There was abject apologies, and the pilots, the voice records of the pilots. So Michael Oren, who was the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., did a history of the Six-Day War, and he especially did an investigation into this incident. And according to the tapes, you can hear the pilots were extremely sorry that they'd attacked an American vessel without realizing it was an American vessel. Now, a CIA report, and I will be showing us an NSA, declassified NSA report, shows on June 13, 1967, found that a pilot could mistake the Liberty for the Egyptian ship, the El Qasser. And also, it says here that, hold on, there's the finding here. The JCS report said the messages were never received because of a combination of 1, human error, 2, a high volume of communications traffic, and 3, a lack of a sense of urgency regarding the movement of the Liberty. The Liberty didn't know, so the Liberty was moving too fast across a war zone, right? The report also included a copy of a flash cable sent immediately after the attack, which reported that Israel had erroneously attacked the Liberty, IDF helicopters were in rescue operations, and Israel had sent abject apologies and requested information on any other U.S. ships in the war zone. They immediately contacted U.S. authorities in Israel and the U.S. president and took corrective action. Now, omitting these details allows people to lie about this. So let me go back here. These are the 10 American investigations, U.S. Navy Court of Inquiry, the CIA report, Joint Chiefs. Now, some of these are still classified, unfortunately, right? Joint Chiefs of Staff fact-finding, called the Russ report, the Clifford report. Now, one of the more interesting ones is there was a Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in 1979, which responded to a critical book by Liberty crewman James Ennis. The Senate investigation found no merit to his claim that the attack was intentional. This is the source of the claim that the attack was intentional. And it was found to be garbage, basically.
Yeah, so who is James Ernest? Or
a crewman. He was a crewman on the Liberty.
So he
and
didn't he was just a grunt then, wasn't he? He wouldn't know about the communication errors and things such as that. He wasn't a man of the upper chain of command, if that makes any sense.
Not that I know of. No. Actually, let me bring this up. I'm going to just. This is the NSA report. No, I didn't look into exactly who he is, but he was a crewman. But there's obviously a very few disgruntled crewmen who weren't happy about the incident. But
well, obviously, I mean, I'd be pissed off if I was getting shot at by anybody. I wouldn't really care if they were Jewish or Muslim or what have you. I would just be pissed off at the time.
Okay, I don't have this document. I will show this document in a couple of days on Jan's show. This is a declassified NSA report. Okay? And it says that this is the NSA report that says from faulty U.S. communications practices, right? And so there were the particulars of the Israeli miscalculation and the details of the American communication failures, a narrative of the attack, and attempts to minimize the compromise, and so on. But they detailed that there were American communications failures. This was a fault of the U.S. Navy for not informing the Israelis about their ship, which was not supposed to be there.
Right. Look, I'm looking at it.
Yeah, so I will be actually bringing up this particular document, this NSA document, in the show on Tuesday.
I will look forward to seeing it, man. That's pretty badass. Wow.
So that's a lot of my. So that's a summary of the things we're busy working on right now, and hopefully it gives people a decent overview of some of the A, propaganda against the Jews in Israel, which are just outright false, and B, the Islamic connection, which people are just flat out ignoring.
Yeah, that's shit.
As well as the propaganda, which is being ignored.
Yeah. So, I guess you showed me your stuff. I guess I could show you some of my stuff that I've
Sure.
noticed.
Just stop my screen sharing.
Yeah, I'll show some of my stuff. I noticed that there is, and again, I'm not nearly as thorough as you are when it comes to these sources. So take it with a grain of salt. This is just raw information that needs to be looked into. I don't have a lot of information about. I don't have many citations. Oftentimes, it's raw, unrefined data. So take it with a grain of salt. There is some level of connection between white nationalism and LaVeyan Satanism.
Okay, that's interesting.
It is. Are you familiar with the Werewolf Order of Satanism?
I watched one of those videos you sent me earlier. Yeah, so that was pretty freaky. I mean, that was crazy.
Would you like to screen share and show that? I could send you some links through chat. It's better if you screen share it. I'd rather see it through your end, if that's possible.
You sent me. This was what was his name?
Nicholas Schreck.
Nicholas Schreck. Yeah, that was nuts.
Yeah, that was. Jan will probably notice that was originally from a Mark Passio presentation about the Dark Occult. He said that Mark Passio, that is, said he was with this group of people. I don't know much about Mark. I've outgrown him intellectually. I don't have anything nice to say about him other than, he's kind of a radical, anarchist, Satanist, Luciferian, what have you. But other than that, I think I've sent you on Facebook a couple of pictures connecting. Oh, good. You're speaking. When are you speaking earlier? Oh God, good grief, haha. We were speaking earlier. I believe it was within the week. I believe it was a week ago or so. Yeah.
Well, yesterday was a long conversation, and then we have in the last week or so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with the Happy Merchant meme?
Yes, you sent me that. Yes, that's you. You actually, I didn't know what that was prior, but you informed me about it.
Yes, the Happy Merchant meme, and I'm see if I could do screen share here. Be a screen share within our screen share. Well, technically, I already am screen sharing, so I'll pull up a few things here and there. Give me 1 second. I have to look it up. If I have the proper connections to it. Sorry if I'm a little bit unprepared. Right now, currently, let's see. I have it here. If I could find the damn connection. Alright. If I could find the whole thing. Well, would you show the clip? The clip. Yeah, show that clip while I'm looking for it. I have to seek out this information real quick.
I'm going to put this on this side. And I need to share my screen. Give me a second.
Let's see if I can find see what the chat is saying. Explosion doesn't work on Skype.
Okay, there we go.
Rogue's mic is too low. It's hot. That was earlier, Jan. That was earlier. Again, I don't know.
So this is Nicholas Schreck, interviewed by Tom Metzger.
And Tom Metzger, for those of you who don't know, Tom Metzger is a white nationalist. He was a former Ku Klux Klan member. He was very big in the 1980s, early 1990s.
But his story's all over the place. He's mixing Christianity with paganism, with different ideologies, and it's like he's talking like this is straight out of the Bible, and it's insane. Yep. It's a complete mishmash. And he's talking about certain sociological things, and it's for some reason it's just spinning its wheels right now. Let me just do this again. But it's really, when you listen to this, it's I don't know, it's clearly like very much fabricated.
Tom Metzger, your host for Race and Reason again, that longest-running show of its type on cable access TV. And we're dedicated, of course, to terms a musical
war right now on every front, in music, in literature, utilizing the media against itself. What we're trying to do is bring back a resurgence of the Western European tradition that has been all but lost in the world. And we're using music because that's the instrument that young people respond to right now. We're doing propaganda directly to awaken the wolf in man, because the wolf is a symbol of Western European power and fury, and that's why we use the werewolf imagery.
Now you have
On that point, using the wolf and werewolf imagery, that is, he goes on to talk about how it's part of Christian culture and other things, and it's just nuts. But you know, the idea of the alpha wolf, the idea of the wolf pack and the leader of the wolf pack being aggressive, that was based on a flawed study of wolves where they introduced wolves into Yellowstone Park, right? And these were wolves who had not been socialized and did not know each other and were not part of a pack. They're just a bunch of random wolves they dumped in. Of course, what do random wolves who don't know each other do? They fight. They establish a pecking order. And they said, well, the most violent, most aggressive wolf is the alpha. And this became the narrative, the meme, as it were. A few years later, someone redid that study with wolves who were actually part of a pack and who knew each other. And what they discovered was the alpha wolf is basically like the father in a family. He finds a mate, he stays with that mate, he raises kids, he provides a stable family, and he keeps peace within the pack. He's not aggressive, because violence and aggression within the pack leads to friction, leads to destructiveness within the pack. So what they do is they raise the young, they teach them the rules, and they can maintain order. So it's like your dad, not like this aggressive young buck who screws everything he sees. So that idea has become the common narrative, but it's actually a completely false one.
We'll go into that a bit more, because I've noticed something else. One of the claims a lot of the white nationalists like to rig up about race realism, for instance, is that blacks have a low IQ. You obviously are a African gentleman. You clearly have done your research. I mean, you've blown away pretty much all of my notions when it comes to the Talmud and Islam. I mean, you've given me so much to look at that I have to literally just sit down and read for like a couple days. Right. And, well, let's just say you have to have at least a moderately high IQ to do what you just done. So, I mean, but I wanted to show this clip right here links with one correlative link between Levian Satanism and white nationalism. I found a picture. I'm going to show it on screen in a second. Give me 1 second. This is from Nicholas Schreck's site. This is Zena LeVay. That's the.
Let me stop screen sharing because I need to cancel my screen sharing. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen.
All right. Well, I've placed over my my OBS software over it. So we have Nicholas Schreck. We have Nick Bugas, who again is the guy who created the Happy Merchant meme. He's the guy who wrote the anti-Semitic caricature of the Jew.
Right.
He wrote that down. Then you have Boyd Rice, who is Non. Non would be Boyd Rice, who is one of the spokespersons for the Church of Satan. We also have feralhouse. Feralhouse was one of these. He wrote a bunch of books from about conspiracy theories and what have you. He also wrote about white nationalism and a lot of alt history stuff. And then there's Bob Heck. Bob Heck, I believe, if I could find a copy of it, a different area. Give me 1 second of who Bob Heck is. Bob Heck. And this is from Wikipedia, so, guys, double check it. Let's see.
Jan said wolf versus shepherd and sheep. So the shepherd and the sheep is Christian imagery. The wolf is satanic.
Obviously. Bob Heck, the American Front. American Front is a white supremacist. This is from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. White supremacist organization started in 1984, but in San Francisco, California, by Bob Heck. The same Bob Heck we have right here. So now we have another connection between Metzger, white nationalism or white supremacy. I don't even know what you call them. I guess white identity politics people. That makes any sense. So we have another connection, and they were part of. They were, again, they had connections. Heck and Boyd Rice. So let's see what else. Where else? It began as a loose organization modeled after the British National Front. Heck began working with Tom Metzger. Metzger's White Aryan Resistance War in 1988. Heck and artist Boyd Rice, ding ding ding, Satanist, posed for photos and AF uniforms for the article on neo-Nazism, Sassy magazine. Rice claims he was never a member of the American Front, but he was friends with Heck. I don't know if how much of that is true or not, but there it goes on and there's more. So here's another clip I'm going to share. This is Nick Bugas, the same guy who did the how should you say it, the Happy Merchant meme, and he's with another gentleman right here. His name is Jim Goad. Now, who is Jim Goad? Well, Jim Goad was a if I could type in his information, because I personally have had a personal history with this guy. I have not I'm not aligned with what he has done, but he's attacked friends of mine. Luke, do you know anything? Can you go into what you know about Jim Goad for a second while I look this guy up?
Well, what little I know about him, he's basically been involved in like the alt-right white nationalist circles, and basically has embraced a kind of atheistic, anti-Christian perspective, or like a paganistic perspective on how to solve the world problems.
Something on that, because Luke, you just touched on something. It's to do with the word Aryan. And you guys have a point there that's... now, Ebionism, that I mentioned earlier, where Muhammad was influenced by Ebionism, is where Jesus is considered completely a man. Right? That's a heretical Christian sect. It was regarded then already, 2,000 years ago, as heretical. You have Docetism, where they say Jesus was completely God. Then you have Nestorianism, where you have mostly God and a little bit man. But Arianism was also a form of heretical Christian worship. Right? And this is where Jesus was mostly a man and a little bit divine. That's Arianism.
Interesting. Yeah, so let's see.
So hold on. So we have the Bechtloff, who says, how do you get thrown out of 110 countries if the problem isn't you? Well, the problem was Christians. Right, because the Jews were thrown out of. Look, I mean, people make up this number. There's probably 4 billion countries by now, but
yeah.
What happened is
one second. The Bechtloff is a friend of mine. He's a kind of a joker, so to speak.
Okay, fine.
He may not be.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Okay, we discussed it. Yeah, I know. I tend to have a short amount of patience, but fine. I'll go a little easier
on him.
Yeah. So Christians were persecuting Jews. They were torturing them. They were killing them. They were imprisoning them. They were stealing their goods, taking their properties, their houses, and mostly most of this had to do with wanting to force Jews to convert to Christianity. This was being done in the Catholic Church. Was being done in Europe in the Protestant churches. So it was rife, and the Jews would simply leave an area when this persecution happened to them. So they didn't leave because they were bad. They left because people were bad to them, and they simply went elsewhere. So they kept moving because people kept picking on them and kept hurting them. Right? That was why they left 110 countries, or however many countries you want. Right? So Christ said, look, I mean, Christianity was about forgiveness. That's why Jews today, many Jews, the Jews who know about Jesus, not all Jews know about Jesus. Some have never heard of him. You don't buy a Bible with the New Testament in Israel, right? They see Jesus as a persecutor of Jews because of the history they've had with the church and Jews in Europe.
Right. So.
But I guess that would be a problem, not having access to the sources.
Yeah. Well, and the deliberate suppression of the sources, right?
Give me 1 second. I had another interview of Jim Goad, and And Spencer, Richard Spencer, of all people. Richard Spencer.
If you look at his policies, he's entirely socialist leftist.
Yeah.
He's not right wing. His policies are entirely leftist.
Have you seen his new girlfriend?
No.
Megan Bubinik?
No.
You haven't seen his new girlfriend?
Why, is she black or something?
No, but no. I'm going to play this clip first. I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to play it.
Well, I got into a fight with a guy. I thought he called me a freak, so we sparred. And we both got black eyes and wound up being rolled up to OSP.
13 minutes in, see if I can get to it. About 13 minutes in, he starts talking about what he was doing in the 90s. Give me 1 second.
Some people might not even know about you.
We've got angry white male. Who the fuck is Jim Goad? And I'm like, well, I invented the angry white male, sir. You owe me royalties.
I'll watch this video.
Right. No, I've known about you for a while.
You're not sharing
and
audio.
I actually knew about you.
Audio.
I'm not sharing audio?
Yeah, you have to click a button.
Yeah, they're in two different buttons. You have to click on the microphone button or hold your mouth button.
The share audio. There's a share video with audio button below the share screen button.
Share video with audio.
There's a share audio option when you do that.
Okay.
Yeah, play on the bottom. See share computer sound?
Try it now, I guess?
Yeah, play it now.
Even before I became alt-right, you could say I knew about
work?
the Redneck Manifesto, and I thought it was a very interesting, a very interesting book. I actually read it more than 20 years ago now, I guess.
Yeah, it came out in '97, and
when
we had this sort of proto-alt-right little clique back in the early '90s. It was Adam Parfrey, who was Jewish, but he was a publisher of Feralhouse, and he wants to. I mean, Adam just died, and I don't want to get too into it, but I think he suffered brain degeneration from, he had this car accident in the 90s that put water on his brain. And Adam got it from the minute I met him. And he told me, he's like, well, I hang out with all these Nazis because my parents are Jewish, and I hear the way they talk about non-Jews. And then in public, they're talking about racism. They're full of shit. Toward the end of his life, Adam on Facebook was a Trump derangement guy. 100%. And some people I know kind of clock. He died of like a brain hemorrhage or something, or a stroke. But the thing about him was, okay, you can change your politics, but he changed his whole personality. Adam had a great sense of humor and would understand the moral panic that we're in these days. But he became panicking about Trump. But he was the publisher of that circle. Boyd Rice, who used to be considered he was like a noise musician.
Oh, an amazing poet, and I mean, his lyrics are sardonic, but then the music is also listenable.
I put on chats that it was unlistenable, but yeah, Disneyland can wait. Nick Bougas, that he was part of our circle. Are you familiar with that name? And
I'm not familiar with him.
God, this is a hard thing. Somebody in the chat can say who Nick Bougas is. I'm not allowed to say who it is. Joe Byrne. Yeah, Joe. I'll say Nick did cartoons for us. That's all I'll say, and that's a pretty heavy hint. Nick is, but he's never. I don't want to say anymore. Nick's a really good friend, but that Happy Merchant's sure a good cartoon. That's all I'll say. Okay, but yeah, and
what do you think?
Ha 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 ha! It's all a laugh.
Yeah. So there is that.
Yeah, no, what's fascinating is they're just continuing in the Nazi tradition, in the communist tradition, as well as in the Islamic tradition. So if the jihadis are not good people, if the communists were evil people, if the Nazis were evil, how is it a good thing to continue in that tradition and repeat what they repeat and say what they say?
Well, then it boils down to, again, keep in mind, I didn't know about a lot of this Talmud stuff. I didn't know a lot about, this, these connections between, Levine's Satanism and white nationalism until I started looking into it. And a lot of people just accept things. They just accept the notion of first and foremost, all the time. They accept it. And it's really sad that people just accept the information and they don't critically think about it. You know.
True, but I mean, listen to this, right? This is in Islam. Abu Huraira reported Allah's messenger saying, "The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill the Jews until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and the stone or a tree would say, 'Muslim, the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him.'" Right? That is Sahih Muslim, book 41, Hadith 6985. Now, so they would say Muslim or the servant of Allah. So the people wanting the genocide of the Jews are servants of Allah, whether they know it or not.
Well, that sucks. That's pretty bad. I mean, and of course, Jan is saying that see the brain database link above. Feralhouse total CIA cell. There is no link that I could see. You'll have to relink it. I don't know if you can link it in the chat, but I will post a link in the post stream. Now, again, we've been going on for about 3 hours.
We should end it in about 2.5. I need to call it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully, I mean, hopefully we've clarified for anyone who will listen to this and those who have listened to it that this is all linked to Nazism, it's linked to communism, and it's linked to the jihadis, and all of it's violent, all of it's aggressive, and it's all a lie.
Yeah, and it's a hard pill to swallow. Honestly, I mean, I didn't know about it. I didn't know much about it. Approve my post above. I will go into that, Jan, and I will look into. I'll look into it. Give me 1 second. Let me get to the live chat.
Luke, comments from you?
What's up?
No, Luke. Any comments from you? Any thoughts from you?
This whole conversation does remove all the quasi-religious motivations. Although I think a topic we didn't really get on is distinguishing what a Jew is, because most of the people in the alt-right circles or national circles refer to Jews primarily as a race first and a religion second.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, when they attack the Talmud, which is actually they're attacking the Old Testament, which means they're attacking the basis of Christianity. Right, which is also attacking the basis of Western moral law. So really that's what anything and everything that, because Christian moral law or Western morality is antithetical to Islam, Nazism, and communism. So they have to destroy the church, they have to destroy our values to impose theirs. Ultimately, I think it boils down to that.
Interesting.
And the question of what is a Jew, originally a Jew would have been obviously the tribes of Judah and so on as Old Testament biblical stuff. We're busy working on that answer, actually. There are a few very clear answers on that. But within the New Testament, anyone who accepts God becomes, and who's circumcised, has a circumcision of the heart, becomes essentially the family of the Jews or the chosen people. Now, the Jews, there were separate promises made to the Jews biblically. There's numerous of them. I can quote a few of them. I've got a chapter on them in my database, amongst the notes you've seen, where I go through some of those, where Jews are said that it is their job to be a witness to the world and take on that responsibility. And
Luke,
there are people...
1 second. Luke, do you know how to enable... if I make you a moderator, because I don't have any mods in my chat. I don't have any mods. I just started out. I don't have any mods. If I give you, if you can send me a link, Luke, I will make you a mod, and then you could enable his Logosmedia's his link. If that would be possible.
Yeah.
I can make you a mod. Again, I just started off. I'm very unprofessional. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, I can send you a Dropbox link as well. I'll paste it in the chat, which is some of the documents that I'm referring to that people can look at for themselves.
Right. Okay, let's make you a mod.
So I'll just drop this in there. People can have a look at it and see what I'm talking about on some of these issues. I've also given you various documents which you can probably make a folder and share it and give it to people.
I shall do that. I shall do that.
Yeah. Because we need to get this information out and people can check it. And also this information can be improved upon. There's room for improving. There's only a handful of us working on it.
I'll make you a mod this one time, and then I'll revoke it afterwards. Logosmedia, just this one time. Give me 1 second, because I'm not the best at this. This is my first chance.
Yeah, I'm gonna send you in. Okay, this is inside of Skype chat.
Go. You've been given a moderator position.
This is a box link, and you can always put this in the comments later. You can add that link for your audience, in the comments of the video.
Right. There you go. Okay, cool. Jan, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Again, kind of a bit of a very, very hard to I'm starting off. They took away my bread and butter, which was Google Hangouts, the Google people. So it's very hard for me to get this to start with this new format. A lot of people are adapting to it real quickly, but there is a connection. But I spoke before. I'll probably end it on this. Megan Bobinek. She's a
Feralhouse.
What?
Hakeem Bey. Feralhouse publishers Peter Lambo and Wilson Hakeem Bey. That's a very Iranian name. He's obviously convert. Interesting.
Yeah, I'm giving you as much as I can give you.
Yeah, so, I need to call it soon, so it's a bit late here on the side.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So Luke, any comments from you? Anything you got out of it? Any further comments from you, rather?
Well, thank you so much for your input, and you've given us a lot to digest on.
He's a known pedophile. Hak Kim Bin.
I
don't know. I don't know. But this is Megan Bobinek. Megan Bobinek is Richard Spencer's new wife, supposedly. That's who and she's a leftist. She is a leftist.
Well, so is he. He's not right wing. They like to say he's right wing, but he's not at all right wing.
He isn't.
His politics are entirely left wing.
This is
so I'm going to
Bobinek and her white nationalist friend. Yeah. It's kind of fucked up.
Bubonic. Is that like bubonic plague? Is that a play on bubonic?
Bobinek?
Yeah.
That's her last name.
Yeah, okay. Bubonic.
Alright, so that being said, I think we're good for now. I think I'm going to end the stream.
Have I answered all your questions?
You've answered a great majority of them. Some of the stuff I have to do my own research, but I've been just filled with a bunch of information about this stuff. There has been, for further research, Jan, there is some connections between Satanism and white nationalism. If you're saying the Feralhouse was CIA, I wouldn't be surprised. There's an old adage within the white nationalist community that you go to any of these... like Ku Klux Klan meetings or what have you, there's an old saying that 90% of those people are government feds and agents. So I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. I'll have to have Jan on sometime.
Yeah, it would be a good idea. Yeah, thanks for the support and the tips, Jan. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm gonna revoke your mod rights for now. Yes, it is. He says yes, it is CIA. Yes, white nationalists are cult/Nazi Islam. I'm going to revoke your... I don't know if you'll get rid of it. I'm going to have it on just for now. I will revoke it later on, and I'll post it in the description. Your brain database link.
Also, the link that I've provided you, just add that in. People can go start to grab the box and read. Also, the ones I've given you, if you want to make a link for that for people.
I will definitely look into that. I will definitely find a way to link that, whether I use Dropbox or some other service. I have a lot of things I gotta do. It's 2 o'clock. This is, yeah. So, yeah, I guess this is a good starting place for, the relationship between myself, you, Logosmedia. Just, we're all good. We're all great. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. I appreciate it. Maybe I'll give you a $10 super chat and you can buy yourself a steak or something.
Well, thank you, Rogue. I appreciate it. I mean, you've done a lot just stepping forward as you have.
Alrighty. Alright, well, have a good week, guys. This will probably give you at least something to chew on for a couple of days. 3 hours long. I never gone this long. So,
Unexpected, yeah.
yeah. Digital Renegade podcast, out.
Take care. Good night.